যদি সবাই ফিরে যায়, ওরে ওরে ও ভাগা সবাই ফিরে যায়, যদি গহন পথে যাওয়ার কালে কেউ ফিরে না যায়, তবে পথের কাটা তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা দলরে, তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা দলরে, যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে তবে একলা চলো রে। যদি আলো না ধরে, ওরে ওরে ও ভাগা আলো না ধরে, যদি ঝড় বাদলে আধার রাতে দুয়ার দেয় ঘরে, তবে বজ্রানলে আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা জলরে, আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা জলরে, যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে তবে একলা চলো রে। একলা চলো, একলা চলো, একলা চলো, একলা চলো রে।
Hi guys, thank you for joining the live stream. We are back after many a day with discussing this specific book called The Machinery of Freedom, Guide to a Radical Capitalism by David Friedman, son of Milton Friedman. And our attempt has been with this book to see what aspects of it can we retain and do a Hindutva 2.0, where there's no appeasement, there's a complete focus on free markets, merit, etc. And people like Savarkar would have been, I think, really at home with these ideas, hence he's in the thumbnail, because except the fact that during Savarkar's era, people did not really know the full consequences of socialism. It wasn't proven up until that point in history that socialism definitely always every time fails. And he was no economist, so he might not have known what was going to be the outcome of his idea of the state running the show. But why Savarkar is still included in this pantheon of general idea of looking at the world and society is because in everything else other than the society, he almost seems libertarian. And in terms of the state running the show, even in terms of businesses and banks and stuff, he makes a very interesting caveat, which commies have never done, that yes, the state will run the industries because industry is very important. Prosperity is important. Prosperity is one of the goals. With socialism and communism, that's not even the goal. But yes, we may or may not do it, but it's not really the goal. So it is the goal. And when laborers do have a problem, and in fact it's proven beyond a shadow of doubt that they are having problems, the people running the factories will actually have to step up and help them out. And this is the part that commies and socialists have never talked about or even dreamed about. If the business or the specific factory are not doing well, then the laborers have to step up and do what needs to be done. So other than things like anarcho-capitalism, the complete borderlessness of it, I think most things in libertarianism are doable, which is basically can be called minarchism. Most of that is doable, I think, as part of a very strong Hindu state, and definitely no tolerance of intolerance. So interestingly, now the chapter we are going to start today, this is the 8th discussion on this book. This chapter is called Is Anarcho-Capitalism Libertarian? Namaskar Shekhar. Hello Rishabh. Aaj communist ka Diwali, yes, which is why we're discussing libertarianism. Tenoka Banzai Singh was Friedman Jewish? No idea. Some German Jewish names have man at the end. It starts with a quote from William Woolridge. A man who wants protection will fire patrolmen who waste their time harassing minorities. No private policeman has ever spent many hours at a restroom peephole in hopes of apprehending deviates. I have described how a private system of courts and police might function, but not the laws it would produce and enforce. I have discussed institutions, not results. That is why I have used the term anarcho-capitalist, which describes institutions rather than libertarian. Whether these institutions will produce a libertarian society, a society in which each person is free to do as he likes with himself and his property as long as he does not use either to initiate force against others, remains to be proven. Under some circumstances, they will not. If almost everyone believes strongly that heroin addiction is so horrible that it should not be permitted anywhere under any circumstances, anarcho-capitalist institutions will produce laws against heroin. Laws are being produced for a market that is what the market wants. But the market demands are in dollars, not votes. The legality of heroin will be determined not by how many are for or against, but by how high a cost each side is willing to bear in order to get its way. People who want to control other people's lives are rarely eager to pay for the privilege. They usually expect to be paid for the services they provide for their victims. And those on the receiving end, whether of laws against drugs, laws against pornography, or laws against sex, get a lot more pain out of the oppression than their oppressors get pleasure. They are willing to pay a much higher price to be left alone than anyone is willing to pay to push them around. For that reason, the laws of an anarcho-capitalist society should be heavily biased toward freedom. So compulsory puritanism, crimes without victims, should be much rarer under anarcho-capitalism than under political institutions. Interesting. We can get some idea of how rare by considering the costs such laws now impose on their victims and the value of such laws to their supporters. If the value of a law to its supporters is less than its cost to its victims, that law, by logic of the previous chapter, will not survive in an anarcho-capitalist society. Heroin addicts pay over $2 billion a year for heroin. This is a beautiful quote, by the way. If the value of a law to its supporters is less than its cost to its victims, that law, by the logic of the previous chapter, will not survive in an anarcho-capitalist society. Heroin addicts pay over $2 billion a year for heroin. If heroin were legal, its cost would be much lower. Almost all of the $2 billion now spent for heroin is the cost of the law, not the habit. Addicts bear additional costs in prison sentences, overdoses caused by the poor quality control typical of illegal products, and other side effects of the laws against heroin. Heroin addicts would therefore be willing, if necessary, to bear a cost of $2 billion or more in order to have the drug legal. It would cost the rest of the population, assuming all of them wanted to keep heroin illegal, an annual expenditure of about $10 per capita or $40 per family to match that. If the choice had to be made on an all or nothing basis, public opinion against heroin is probably strong enough that people would be willing to bear that cost. But none of the advantages of a market system of laws is its ability to but one of the advantages of a market system of laws is its ability to tailor its product to its customers, geographically as well as in other ways. If the maximum return comes from having heroin illegal in some places and legal in others, that is what will happen. And you see again, repeatedly from the very beginning of the book, we have noticed repeatedly that it seems the book is describing or wishes a country would exist that was kind of like ancient India. Very, very decentralized and more or less different laws for different places. But of course, politically, it has to be one central government. We can't go back to that now. Most of the population lives in areas where there are few heroin addicts. For those people, the cost of having heroin made illegal locally would be low, since there would be no one on the other side bidding to have it legal, except perhaps a few New York addicts who wanted to vacation away from the big city and bring their habit with them. In those areas, rights enforcement agencies would accept arbitration agencies that viewed using or selling heroin as a crime. But people in those areas would have little to gain by paying a much higher price to have heroin illegal in New York as well. That leaves 8 million New York non-addicts bidding against 1 lakh New York addicts, raising the cost to the non-addicts of keeping heroin illegal in New York to over $100 a year per person. I predict that if anarcho-capitalist institutions appeared in this country tomorrow, heroin would be legal in New York and illegal in most other places. Marijuana would be legal over most of the country. By now, the reader may be feeling confused. This is natural enough. I'm describing lawmaking in economic terms, and you are used to thinking of it in political terms. When I talk of bidding for one law or another, I do not mean that we will have a legislature that literally auctions off laws. I mean that each person's desire for the kinds of laws he believes in will be reflected in the different rates he is willing to pay his agency according to how good a job it does of getting him the law he wants. This set of demands for laws will be reconciled through the sort of bargaining described in the previous chapter. The process is analogous to the way you and I bid to have a piece of private land used the way we want it used. Our demands for the food that can be grown on it, the buildings that can be built on it, possible recreational uses or whatever, determine how it eventually gets used. What I have been saying is that just as the market allocates resources to producing illegal drugs in response to the demands of those who want to use them, it would make use of those drugs legal in response to the same demand. That raises the question of why the same argument does not hold for making murder legal. The answer is that it is worth much more to the victim not to be shot than to the murderer to shoot him. There is a market demand from me for a law saying that you cannot kill me. Crimes without victims do not hurt anyone, except in the vague sense of arousing moral indignation in people upset over their neighbor's sins. Thus, there is little market demand for laws against them. The same geographical effect that I described for drug laws would apply to other laws as well. Under present institutions, the areas over which laws apply are determined by historical accident. If a majority of the population of a state supports one kind of law, everyone in the state gets it. Under anarcho-capitalism, insofar as it would be possible, everyone would have his own law. Diversity of law cannot be unlimited since the same law must cover both parties to a dispute. But it is possible to have much more diversity than our present system allows. Where the majority and minority or minorities are geographically separate, the majority is mainly concerned with having the laws it wants for itself. It is only our political system that imposes those laws on the minority as well. At this point in the argument, the question of poor people is often raised. Since dollars vote, won't the poor lose out? Yes and no. The more money you are willing to spend for protection, the better quality of protection you can get, and the better you will be able to get the details of the law the way you want them. This is notoriously true now. Our political system of police and courts provides much better service to those with higher incomes. Here as elsewhere, although the market will not bring equality, it will greatly improve the position of the poor. Why? Because the market allows people to concentrate their resources on what is most important to them. I discussed this point earlier in the context of the poor man buying a necessity outbidding the rich man who wants the same good for luxury. Right. The poor man buying a necessity outbidding the rich man who wants the same good for a luxury. Protection from crime is not a luxury. Current government expenditures on police and courts run about $40 a year per capita, according to Friedman's law. That means that private protection of the same average quality would cost about $20. There are many inhabitants of the ghetto who would be delighted to pay $20 a year if in exchange they actually get protection. Many of them have more than that stolen every year as a result of the poor protection they get from our government-run protection system. This book is from 1972 or 73, by the way. Okay, so the prices are according to that. They would be even happier if at the same time they were relieved of the taxes that pay for the protection that the government police do not give them. In spite of popular myths about capitalism oppressing the poor are worst off in those things provided by government, such as schooling, police protection, and justice. Don't we fucking know, lol. There are more good cars in the ghetto than good schools. Putting protection on the market would mean better protection for the poor, not worse. That's the end of this chapter. Next chapter is called, as a free bonus. I guess so. The conversation is continuing. So let him finish the argument. It again starts with a small quote from Mr. Dooley. If I was running for office, I would change my name and have printed on my cards that give him a chance. He can't be worse. End quote. A system of private courts and police has certain special advantages over our present government system. Advantages associated with the political issues of freedom and stability discussed in the previous two chapters. Private courts and police have, in addition, the same advantages over the corresponding government institutions that market arrangements usually have over socialist arrangements. When a consumer buys a product on the market, he can compare alternative brands. In the case of protection, he can compare how good a job different agencies do and their prices. His information is imperfect, as it is in making most decisions. He may make a mistake. But at least alternatives exist. They are there to be looked at. He can talk with neighbors who patronize different agencies, examine the contracts and rates they offer, study figures on the crime rates among their customers. When you elect a politician, you buy nothing but promises. You may know how one politician ran the country for the past 4 years, but not how his competitor would have run it. You can compare 1968 Fords, Chryslers, and Volkswagens, but nobody will ever be able to compare the Nixon administration of 1968 with Humphrey and Wallace administrations of the same year. It is as if we had only Fords from 1920 to 1928, Chryslers from 1928 to 1936, and then had to decide what firm would make a better car for the next 4 years. Perhaps an export automotive engineer could make an educated guess as to whether Ford had used the technology of 1920 to satisfy the demands of 1920 better than Chrysler had used the technology of 1928 to satisfy the demands of 1928. The rest of us might just as well flip a coin. Throw in Volkswagen on American Motors, which had not made any cars in America but wanted to, and the situation becomes still worse. Each of us would have to know every firm intimately in order to have any reasonable basis for deciding which we preferred. In the same way, in order to judge a politician who has held office, one must consider not only how his administration turned out, but the influence of a multitude of relevant factors over which he had no control, ranging from the makeup of Congress to the weather at a harvest time. Judging politicians who have not yet held office is still more difficult. Not only does a consumer have better information than a voter, it is of more use to him. If I investigate alternative brands of cars or protection, decide which is best for me and buy it, I get it. If I investigate alternative politicians and vote accordingly, I get what the majority votes for. The chance that my vote will be the deciding factor is negligible. Imagine buying cars the way we buy governments. 10,000 people would get together and agree to vote each for the car he preferred. Whichever car won, each of the 10,000 would have to buy it. It would not pay any of us to make any serious effort to find out which car was best, since whatever I decide, my car is being picked for me by the other members of the group. Under such institutions, the quality of cars would quickly decline. That is how I must buy products on the political marketplace. I not only cannot compare the alternative products, it would not be worth my while to do so even if I could. This may have something to do with the quality of the goods sold on that market. Caveat emptor. This was nice. Yeah, no face cam because while reading books, in the position I need to keep the books to help my shoulders best. That the position is the book has to remain in front of the camera. Yes, live over. Shekhar is saying, what are your opinions on the types of laws on the type of laws, centralized or decentralized? Laws specifically centralized या decentralized होगा वो बात का conversation है. पहले पूरा का पूरा state formation, yeah, so I guess mainly decentralized is preferable. But the problem is the Indian laws are such a clusterfuck that stuff that should be centralized are not centralized. That the stuff that need not be centralized are centralized. The stuff that are centralized should not be centralized, and the stuff that are centralized should not be centralized. So, for example, let's say many stuff that the center has no business in, and actually states can do different things according to their culture and stuff. Instead of having linguistic states and stuff, and making fake linguistic histories, making up fake kings, calling random zamindars great generational kings, etc., and fighting over a language that's hardly 300 years old or 200 years old, and fighting with people in your own country who are trying to carry on a civilization and language of thousands of years, all that hot shit, uh, all that kind of behavior would not probably need to even exist if the laws were decentralized. Um, Even in our quasi-federal structure, states have retained their kind of character by the way they vote because of the existence of regional parties. But you see, regional parties are killing the nation as a whole, unless that party, the same party, is in the state and the center. So every state has a different culture today, and even in a more decentralized situation, that would be the case anyway. Bihar would probably still suck. Probably not. It would, everything would flip, or in general everything would get better. But let's say Bihar stays behind everyone else because of how much far behind they are starting in the race now. Let's say if today let's say more decentralization happens in terms of laws, and West Bengal would again be just above Bihar, etc. Maharashtra, Delhi, Bangalore, Hyderabad would be far away, far ahead. Pune. Now, in that situation, the only difference from now would be people would be paying a lot less for horseshit services. That is my main focus and goal. And what happens with when you don't pay for horseshit quality of products and services from the government, etc., or even corrupt private institutions because of government collusion? What happens is overall, since when overall expenditure for you will go down, it definitely means that overall expenditure of everyone in everything will go down, which will mean in the end that inflation will go down. So you becoming poorer every year by a few percentage points for no fucking absolute reason, that's definitely going to go away. Yeah, great Indian laws. Srijan is saying, Dada, my college is closed. Do you support closure of education institutions in the name of silly things like May Day, etc.? So for festivals, things will get closed. So one person's silly thing is another person's great civilizational festival. So May Day is a civilizational religious festival for commies. Ab kya kare? Suprabhat Navavimash, when the fuck are you sleeping? By saying just work towards making Sanskrit the national language with other languages dominating their respective states. No central bank, no inflation. India is like Bihari laws applied to Andaman and Nicobar. Yes, Shekhar. Finally, some people get it. Okay, next chapter is called Socialism, Limited Government, Anarchy, and Bikinis. Rishi saying, what the fuck is Mayday? Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. Socialism aa gaya, bhago. Most varieties of socialism implicitly assume unanimous agreement on goals. Everyone works for the glory of the nation, the common good or whatever, and everyone agrees. Okay, glory of nation बोल रहा है क्योंकि ये book 1973 में लिखा गया है. 2025 में कोई socialist भोसड़ी के नहीं बोल रहा है कि हमको glory of nation चाहिए. Everyone works for the glory of the nation, the common good or whatever, and everyone agrees, at least in some general sense, on what that goal means. The economic problem, traditionally defined as the problem of allocating limited resources to diverse ends, does not exist for socialists. Economics is reduced to the engineering problem of how best to use the available resources to achieve the common end. Think of P.C. Mohalanovic's way of running the country. The organization of a capitalist society implicitly assumes that different people have different ends and that the institutions of the society must allow for that differences, diversity. This is one of the things behind the socialist claim that capitalism emphasizes competition, whereas socialism emphasizes cooperation. One of the reasons why socialism seems in the abstract to be such an attractive system. If we all have different ends, we are in a certain sense in conflict with each other. Each of us wishes to have the limited resources available used for his ends. The institution of private property allows for cooperation within that competition, trading with each other in order that each may best use his resources to his ends. But the fundamental conflict of ends remains. Does this mean that socialism is better? No more than the desirability of sunny weather means that women should always wear bikinis or that men should never carry umbrellas. There is a difference between what institutions allow and what they require. If in a capitalist society everyone is convinced of the desirability of one common goal, There is nothing in the structure of capitalist institutions to prevent them from cooperating to attain it. Capitalism allows for a conflict of ends, it does not require it. Socialism does not allow for it. This does not mean that if we set up socialist institutions, everyone will instantly have the same ends. The experiment has been tried. They do not. It means rather that a socialist society will work only if people do have the same ends. If they do not, it will collapse, or worse, develop, as did the Soviet Union, into a monstrous parody of socialist ideals. Lol, guys, haven't we seen these things in countless states in India and countless countries all over the world? The experiment has been done many times on a more modest scale in this country. Communists that survive start with a common end, whether provided by a strong religion or a charismatic leader. Others do not. I have encountered precisely the same error among libertarians who prefer limited government to anarcho-capitalism. That he's talking about us now. Limited government, they say, can guarantee uniform justice based on objective principles. Under anarcho-capitalism, the law varies from place to place and person to person according to the irrational desires and beliefs of the different customers that different protection and arbitration agencies must serve. This argument assumes that the limited government is set up by a population most or all of whose members believe in the same just principles of law. Given such a population, anarcho-capitalism will produce that same uniform just law. There will be no market for any other. But just as capitalism can accommodate to a diversity of individual ends, so anarcho-capitalism can accommodate to a diversity of individual judgments about justice. An ideal objectivist society with a limited government is superior to an anarcho-capitalist society in precisely the same sense that an ideal socialist society is superior to a capitalist society, but only in ideal situations. Socialism does better with perfect people than capitalism does with imperfect people. Limited government does better with perfect people than anarcho-capitalist with imperfect people. And it is better to wear a bikini with the sun shining than a raincoat when it is raining. That is no argument against carrying an umbrella. National defense, the hard problem. And this is what all people, everyone who hears the word libertarianism want to first discuss. Let's get to that topic now, finally. Let me have a sip of coffee. I bought a fantastic new coffee. I only have been drinking a Colombian brew for the last about 1 year now, but I used to buy the pack of just 3 flavors: the double chocolate matcha, the hazelnut, and a normal one. Now I've bought a combination where there's something called epic vanilla chocolate or something like that. The moment I opened the sachet and poured the water into the coffee, oh my god, it smelled like the greatest day of my life. Holy shit, this is so nice. And luckily has only 0.34 calories. Good morning, Shreyansh. Gautam Varun, how many Hindu holidays should be there? Depends on the state. Every state will celebrate some of the unifying holidays and some of their special holidays. That's all. Everyone need not celebrate everyone's holidays. तब तो काम ही नहीं होगा. और फिर मुसलमानों का भी हॉलीडे होगा, सिख का हॉलीडे होगा, क्रिश्चियन का हॉलीडे होगा, तो लौड़े काम कब करेंगे कोई? Colombian select to Bolivian, check it. Shekhar is saying in India, rather than providing solutions by going through objective and subjective consequences, we check if it is feasible. When the premises ही गांडू है तो solution भी गांडू होगा. क्या बात है शेखर? Genius. हमारे audience members are intelligent, more intelligent than some of the guests in many podcasts. Like our membership discussions these days. They are as good as any podcast guest discussions. But you see, feasible का दोष शेखर हम सिर्फ पॉलिटिकल पार्टी को नहीं देंगे, क्योंकि फिजिबिलिटी ना डिपेंड करता है पॉलिटिकल पार्टी का जो सपोर्ट बेस है उसको क्या चाहिए, उसके लिए क्या नॉन नेगोशिएबल है. तो अगर पॉलिटिकल पार्टी का बेस खुद बोले कि ये फिजिबल नहीं है, देयरफॉर ये हम डिमांड नहीं करेंगे हमारे पार्टी से, तो वो फिजिबल नहीं रहेगा. राइट. मान लो कि बीजेपी के लिए कुछ चीजें एक्चुअली फिजिबल है, कुछ चीज एक्चुअली फिजिबल नहीं है. राइट. तो कुछ चीज तो वो चाहकर भी नहीं कर सकते हैं, कुछ कंपल्शन उनके पास है जो करके उनको और भी शायद ज्यादा वोट मिल जाते. वो क्यों नहीं कर रहे हैं? वो क्योंकि उनको पता है कि ये थोड़ा ज्यादा है। तो फिजिबिलिटी भाई हम डिसाइड कर रहे हैं, और कंपेयर इट विद द अदर साइड। वो लोग कहां, कब, इतिहास में कब उन भोसड़ी वालों ने कब कुछ चीज डिमांड किया है डिपेंडिंग ऑन फिजिबिलिटी? ऐसे ही मजा आया, सुबह उठ के लगा कि ये होना चाहिए, तो प्रोसेशन करते गए करते गए करते गए, रास्ता रोकते गए और पिटिशन करते गए। एक दिन वो, और फिर फंडिंग ढूंढ लिए रिसर्च में, ग्लोबल कोलैबोरेशन भी हुआ, एकेडेमिया में आ गया, ट्रिकल डाउन कर गया पॉप कल्चर में, सबको कन्विंस कर दिए कि हाँ हाँ वो चुतिया डिमांड जो एक दिन सुबह उठ के याद आया था वही एक्चुअली बहुत बढ़िया बात है, और वो फिजिबल बन गया। तो फिजिबिलिटी के चक्कर में मैं कोई भी पॉलिटिकल पार्टी को दोष नहीं देता हूं, मोदी, मौलाना मोदी, कांग्रेस या बीजेपी, किसी का दोष नहीं है। फिजिबिलिटी में सिर्फ और सिर्फ पार्टी के सपोर्टर्स का, उन सपोर्टर्स का दोष है जो कि बोलते हैं कि ये डिमांड मत करो, इस बारे में बात मत करो, क्योंकि ये लौड़े पार्टी के लिए फिजिबल नहीं है। Bengal is the only state which was set by Britishers for centuries, then prepared by, yeah. PRB is making an interesting point, and I was going to talk about it in the next audience interaction stream, but I'm just making a point. I'll skim through the point largely here, broadly here. You all can ponder over it and contemplate over it yourselves. That a criticism that many Indians make against anyone they don't like is that ये किसी के सगे नहीं होते. But you see, the किसी के सगे नहीं होते argument absolutely applies to commies in general, commies and even liberals. I mean, even most of us are actually liberals, but the liberals in that kind, the left liberal sense, because they actually think of themselves as global citizens. And that's not just Arundhati Roy or Amartya Sen. Even me, people in urban cosmopolitan areas, metropolitan cities, people with a bit of anglicized backgrounds, we have been brought up that way. So, for example, a few days back we discussed that that girl who said that Hamas is not even a terrorist group; they are just freedom fighters, and we have been taught these sentences that one man's freedom fighter, another man's revolutionary, etc. And then in the comment section, a guy said that was being said by a Brahmin Hindu Kolkata-based girl, and in the comment section, another Hindu guy was saying, I don't know his caste, that yes, exactly, and these our hyper nationalistic idiots don't understand that you defend and glorify, lionize your freedom fighters, but this is Hamas doing the same thing. First of all, भोसरी के मुझे ये बताओ कि श्री अरबिंदो ने जाके कौन से ब्रिटिश लड़कियों को रेप किया? तो इक्विवेलेंस तो है ही नहीं। मैं मान लेता हूं हुआ था कि हाँ फ्रीडम चाहिए, तो अब ब्रिटिश लड़कियों को रेप करते हैं तो इंग्लैंड भाग जाएगा, ऐसा अगर लॉजिक चुतिया घुसता हमारे रेवोल्यूशनरीज में, अगर वैसा भी है, अगर उसके वजह से ब्रिटिश गए, तो भी भाई यहाँ पे ये ग्लोबल सिटीजन के तौर पे अपने आप को सोचने वालों में क्या गलती हो रहा है कि yes, objectively it's true then therefore that Sri Aurobindo and Hamas is I guess same, but in the end Hamas is destroying a country where you could have wanted to probably go to live, work, fuck, marry, travel and study. Sri Aurobindo though definitely is from your country where you are born and you live here, your parents live here, they have not left or run away or not have been kicked out. Palestine is not such a country. So in the end, you'll have to pick a side. And that's just the Savarkar right view, I think. That yes, you are what you are, but pick a side, and that side must be Hindu in our case. So why I'm responding this way to PRB's comment is that it reminds me that you see the repercussions of that globalist thinking and the global citizen way of thinking is that there's a vacuum in your identity, and when you have a vacuum in your identity, when you don't pick a side will pick you, and that side will be the most violent, most irrational, most aggressive one that will just pick you up or make you do its bidding without you fully being consciously aware of it. So you must be consciously aware of your intentions and the world around you in general, yourself, and pick a side before a side picks you. Is caste census a good thing? Well, for political purposes, yeah, BJP was going to see, unless any party does not eliminate reservations and eliminate recognition of castes in the first place, whether caste census happens or doesn't happen does not really make a difference. Reservations were going to go on. It's going to increase anyway, regardless of caste census or not. Reservations will keep increasing. I believe reservations in some day, unless Savarkarite views become popular, someday reservations will be 96%, 97%, because the Brahmin population is 4%, 4.5% in the entire country. So in the end, everyone except Brahmins will probably go on demanding that, अच्छा इनको मिल रहा है तो हमको, इसको मिल रहा है तो हमको, इसको भी मिल रहा है तो हमको. Only Brahmins will never be able to do it because of their population maybe. And by the logic of the castes that today get reservation, there can be made a same on the same lines. A case can be made for reservation for everyone except the Brahmins, because allegedly only Brahmins oppressed everyone below them, right? So, bhai, abhi ka argument hai कि yes, Brahmins therefore oppressed Kshatriyas, Kshatriyas oppressed Vaishyas, and Brahmins and so Brahmins oppressed Kshatriyas and everyone else below. Brahmins and Kshatriyas oppressed Vaishyas and below. Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas oppressed everyone and below. And अभी आर्ग्यूमेंट है कि वैश्यास के बिलो जो जो हुआ उनमें से उसमें कोई हायरार्की नहीं था एंड किसी ने किसी के साथ कोई अत्याचार नहीं किया. इनमें से यहाँ पे शुरू हुआ सर, बाकी इन तीनों में. तो भाई जब वैश्यास सिर्फ अगर बोलने लगे कि देखिए तो क्षत्रिय और वैश्य ब्राह्मण ने भी हम पर अत्याचार किया है तो रिजर्वेशन, एंड देन क्षत्रिय भी बोलेगा नहीं, ब्राह्मण लोग हमको बोल रहे थे कि युद्ध करो एटसेट्रा, वो भी अत्याचार है तो हमको भी रिजर्वेशन. तो कास्ट का ये चूतिया अंडरस्टैंडिंग जब तक नहीं जाएगा बढ़ते ही रहेगा. ब्राह्मण विल आस्क फॉर अ डिफरेंट कंट्री, देन हु विल गिव देम? 4% पॉपुलेशन क्या देश चलाएगा? आई सी दैट्स व्हाई सेक्युलर्स ऑफन सपोर्ट मुस्लिम. या वैक्यूम हो गया है, मैग्नेट पे लग गया, चिपक गया. Okay, now we'll discuss national defense. National defense has traditionally been regarded, even by believers in a severely limited state, as a fundamental function of government. To understand why, one must first understand the economic concept of a public good and the difficulties of financing a public good without coercion. A public good is an economic good which, by its nature, cannot be provided separately to each individual but must be provided or not provided to all members of a pre-existing group. A simple example is the control of a river whose flooding injures the land of many farmers in the valley below. There is no way that an entrepreneur who proposes to build a dam can protect only those farmers who agree to pay part of the cost of the dam. An individual farmer may refuse to pay, reasoning that if the others all pay, he will be protected anyway, and if they do not, his contribution will not be enough to build the dam. The small probability that his contribution will make the difference between the dam being built and not being built, multiplied by the value to him of the dam, is not enough to justify the expenditure. This is a traditional problem of the public good. It is a problem because if there are enough farmers like this, each acting rationally on a correct calculation of his own self-interest, the dam will not be built, even if the combined value to all the farmers is more than the cost of building the dam. In our society, the usual solution is to use government force, taxation, to make those benefited and others pay for the dam. One problem with this solution is that the dam may be produced even when its total value is less than its cost. The government has no market mechanism for measuring the total value of the dam to the farmers. And since government decisions are made on political grounds, the government may choose to ignore cost and value entirely. In practice, public dams are often built even when the return on the capital spent building them, including a generous estimate of non-monetary benefits, is far below the market rate of return on other investments. There are several market solutions to the problem of providing a public good. For instance, the entrepreneur might estimate how much the dam is worth to each farmer, draw up a contract obligating each farmer to pay that amount if and only if every other farmer agrees to pay his share, and circulate it. Each farmer knows that if he refuses to sign, the dam will not be built, since the contract has to be unanimous. It is therefore in his interest to sign. In order for this to work, the entrepreneur must estimate correctly the value of the dam to each farmer. If he sets the price for one farmer too high, the dam will not be built. His job is made more difficult by those farmers who realize that it is in their interest to pretend that they think the dam of little value in order to have only a small part of the cost assigned to them. A farmer interested in raising rice, for instance, might find occasional floods a useful supplement to his irrigation and have no interest in paying for flood control. The entrepreneur would have to remove such a farmer's name from the contract in order to have any chance at all of getting it signed. That is fair enough. There is no reason for the farmer to pay for something that is worthless to him. But as soon as word spreads, other farmers realize that an interest in growing rice can save them a lot of money. The Rice Growers Gazette acquires new subscribers, all of whom are careful to leave their copies in prominent places around the house when the dam entrepreneur comes to call. Talk at the general store shifts from mowing hay to the relative virtues of different strains of rice. The entrepreneur is faced with the problem of figuring out which farmers are really interested in growing rice and which are only interested in being interested in growing rice, with the objective of growing wheat and getting flood control without paying for it. If he guesses wrong and puts a real rice farmer on his unanimous contract, it does not get signed. If he plays safe and takes everyone who pretends to be interested in rice off the contract, he may not be able to raise enough money. The larger the public for a given public good, the harder it is to arrange such a unanimous contract successfully. The larger the difference between the value of the good and its price, on the other hand, the easier the entrepreneur's job. Okay, listen to this once again. नहीं समझ आया, वापस समझा देता हूं. The larger the public for a given public good, the harder it is to arrange such a unanimous contract successfully, obviously. The larger the difference between the value of the good and its price, on the other hand, the easier the entrepreneur's job. The difference between the value of the good and the price of the good. He can leave a generous margin for error by only listing the farmers of whom he is sure and charging each of them less than the dam is probably worth to him, yet still raise enough money. Another way to provide a public good without coercion is by temporarily converting it into a private good. The entrepreneur could do this by purchasing most of the land in the valley before telling anyone that he is thinking of building a dam. He then builds the dam and resells the land at a higher price since the dam raises the land's value. The increase in the value of the land measures the total benefit from the dam. If it is much larger than the cost of the dam, the entrepreneur makes a profit. There may be a few farmers who refuse to sell, but as long as the entrepreneur owns most of the land, he receives most of the benefit. Here again, the entrepreneur's job is harder the more people are involved. It becomes difficult to buy all the land before the owners realize what is happening and raise their voice. Here also, the job is easier the bigger the difference between cost and benefit. If the benefit is more than twice the cost of building the dam, the entrepreneur makes a profit even if he can only buy half the land. In both cases, the transactions themselves have a cost and thus increase the effective cost of building the dam. Gathering the information needed to draw up a successful unanimous contract may be expensive. Buying up all the land in the valley involves substantial brokerage fees. Farmers who are not planning to sell must be paid more than the market price to compensate for their inconvenience. A clever entrepreneur, buying not the land but merely an option to buy at a predetermined price, can reduce such costs but not eliminate them. How does this apply to national defense? Is it a public good? Can it be financed without coercion? Some contemporary anarchists argue that national defense can be provided or not provided for each individual or at least each small group. One form of this argument is the assertion that national defense is unnecessary in an anarchist society since there is no nation to defend. Unfortunately, there will still be nations to defend against unless we postpone the abolition of our government until anarchy is universal. Defense against nations in the present state of military technology is a public good. It is all very well to fantasize about fighting the invader village by village, commune by commune, or corporation by corporation, according to the dreamer's particular brand of anarchy. A serious invader would inform each unit that if it resisted or failed to pay tribute, it would be destroyed by a nuclear weapon. After the invader proved that he meant business, the citizens of the surviving communities would be eager to create the institutions, voluntary or otherwise, necessary to give the invader what he wanted. Pending major technological change, defense against nations must be provided on a large enough scale to support retaliatory and perhaps also defensive nuclear forces. This makes it difficult to sell national defense on the free market. An ABM fired at a missile 1,000 miles from its target cannot distinguish warheads aimed at those who have paid for defense from warheads aimed at those who have not. Even if defense is retaliatory, and even if the retaliatory system is secure enough to hold its fire until it knows whether its customers have been hit, the problem remains. The citizens of New York, having paid their share of defense costs, can hardly look with equanimity on the hydrogen bombing of Philadelphia, which has contributed not a penny, not at least if the wind is blowing the wrong way. So, national defense against nations, must defend areas of national size, whether or not they contain nations. It is thus a public good and one with a very large public. Can this public good be financed by some variant of one of the non-coercive methods I have discussed? It is not obvious how. The size of the public is so enormous that a unanimous contract is virtually impossible, especially since one secret supporter of a foreign power could prevent the whole deal. Buying up most of the land affected by national defense might be less difficult than negotiating a unanimous contract among 200 million people, but hardly easy, since the land must be purchased before sellers realize what is going on and increase their price. Raising enough money to buy the United States would be a hard project to keep secret. In addition, the transaction costs would be substantial, about $100 billion in realtor commissions for all the fixed property in the United States. There is one favorable factor to help offset these difficulties. I estimate the cost of a minimal national defense at about $20 billion to $40 billion a year. The value to those protected is several hundred billion dollars a year. National defense is thus a public good worth about 10 times what it costs. This may make it easier, although not easy to devise some non-coercive way of financing it. The problem would be simpler if it could be subdivided. Groups much smaller than our present population might be able to create defense organizations and finance them voluntarily. It would be in their interest to do so if such groups could defend themselves. Once such organizations existed, hundreds of them could combine, via unanimous contracts, to defend areas of national or even continental size. One could imagine an alternate history in which, as military technology developed, such voluntary arrangements evolved, just as coercive governments evolved in our history. But in the present world, small groups cannot defend themselves. They therefore have no incentive to develop voluntary arrangements to finance defense. A solution to the problem of developing institutions that provide defense without the state, paradoxically enough, might be provided by the state itself. Suppose that over the next 50 or 100 years, private institutions gradually take over all governmental functions except defense. The state, without control of local institutions, might find the cost of collecting taxes substantial and be tempted to raise money in the manner of the French monarchy by selling tax exemptions. It could offer to exempt any community from taxation in exchange for either a capital sum or an annual payment. Such a tax exemption would itself be a public good. For example, defense via bribery from one's own state would be a public good for the community. Since the collection costs of taxation are high, the value of a tax exemption is greater than its cost. Since the collection costs of taxation are high, the value of a tax exemption is greater than its cost. The members of the community might therefore find it in their interest to set up an organization designed to pay off the state. It could be financed voluntarily by one of the ways of financing public goods that I have described. It would probably pay an annual fee instead of a lump sum in order to make sure the state stayed bought. Over a period of time, many or most communities develop such institutions. There then exists a group of organizations voluntarily funded either by the interest on a capital endowment or by contractual agreements to pay on the part of members of the community and charged with the task of defending their communities. These organizations could then contract with each other to take over from the existing state the job of financing and providing national defense. So one solution to the problem of national defense might be the development for some related purposes of local defense organizations. There must be organizations permanently endowed for the purpose of providing defense. They cannot be simply local firms with an interest in the protection of their country, since such firms, having agreed to pay part of the cost of national defense, would be driven out of business by new competitors who had not. This is the problem with Morris and Linda Tannehill's idea of financing national defense through an insurance company or companies which would insure customers against injury by foreign states and finance national defense out of the money saved by defending their customers. Such an insurance company, in order to pay the cost of defense, would have to charge rates substantially higher than the real risk, given the existence of its defense system, justified. Since people living in the geographical area defended would be protected whether or not they were insured by that particular company, it would be in their interest either not to be insured or to be insured by a company that did not have to bear the burden of paying for defense and could therefore charge lower rates. The National Defense Insurance Company would lose all its customers and go bankrupt, just as it would if it were simply selling national defense directly to individual customers who would be defended whether or not they paid. The same difficulty occurs with Ayn Rand's suggestion of financing national defense by having the government charge for the use of its courts. In order to raise money for defense, such a government must either charge more than competing private court systems or provide a worse product. Such private courts, if permitted, would therefore drive the government out of the court business, depriving it of its source of income. Miss Rand apparently expects her government to have a monopoly of the court and protection business. And if the government does not use coercion to keep out competitors, there is no obvious reason why the sorts of institutions described earlier in this section should not arise. If the government does claim special rights that it does not give to private courts and rights enforcement agencies, for instance, the right of policemen to make mistakes and not be responsible for the damage done, or the right of government courts to subpoena witnesses, then it becomes a government in my sense of the term. Ms. Rand uses a different definition, an agency of legitimized coercion. Either the things the government does but forbids its competitors from doing are coercion, in which case it is coercing private citizens, or they are not coercion, in which case it coerces the private rights enforcement agencies by forbidding them to do the same non-coercive things. Either way, Ayn Rand's government must be coercive in order to work, so it is not a solution to the libertarians' problem of providing national defense without coercion. Although local defense organizations must be endowed, they might evolve in ways other than those I have described. For instance, existing insurance companies would receive a capital windfall at the time an adequate national protection system was first constructed. Since outstanding policies that had been sold at high rates under high risk conditions could be paid off under low risk conditions, they could use this windfall, which comes only from policies already written and thus represents only that small part of the benefit of defense which accrues in the near future to those already insured, to endow national defense. Such an endowment would not be sufficient to pay all the costs of national defense, unless it becomes far cheaper than it now is, but it might cover some of them. There are other ways that part of the cost might be paid. Charities exist for the purpose of financing public goods. They currently collect billions of dollars a year. There is no reason why national defense should not be partly financed by charitable contributions. Historically, it has been. In time of war, people often donate money, labor, and weapons and purchase war bonds for more than their market value. There is another common way of financing public goods that is intermediate between normal economic methods and charity. The best example is the institution of tipping. Customers at a restaurant leave a tip even if they have no intention of eating there again, and therefore no personal interest is in rewarding good service. The rewarding of good service is a public good. If everyone does it, everyone will benefit by the improved service. But if I do it at a restaurant where I rarely eat, most of the benefit goes to the other people who use the restaurant. I tip partly because I realize this and view good restaurant service as a desirable goal, in effect, a worthy object of charity. A more important reason is that I feel I ought to tip. An internal feeling of obligation or external social pressure make me act according to a sort of implicit contract, an obligation to reward the waiter if he does a good job, even though I know that there is nothing forcing me to do so, and that I will suffer no material loss if I do not. Similarly, if national defense were financed voluntarily, people would give money not as a matter of charity, but because they felt that they were receiving something and ought to pay for it. As with tipping, this is worthless in a world where Islam exists. As with tipping, the amount received might have some connection with how good a job they thought was being done. And like tipping, people might feel obligated to give something even if the job were only barely satisfactory. However bad the service, few of us have the temerity to leave no tip at all. How much are people willing to pay on such a basis? I do not know, but one way of getting a rough idea is by seeing how much they pay in tips under circumstances where they receive no direct benefit by tipping well. This is usually the case with taxis, since few of us expect to get the same driver twice, but only sometimes with restaurants, since many customers go to the same restaurant regularly. Taxi tips total about $150 million a year. All sorts of tips combined total about $2 billion. Such figures suggest that individual feelings of obligation reinforced by social pressure might provide a substantial fraction of the cost of defending against foreign enemies, a service most of us regard as more important than keeping up the quality of restaurant service. Although national defense is primarily a public good, there are parts of it which can be sold separately to individuals or groups. Foreign states would probably treat a national defense agency as a government with respect to such matters as passports and extradition treaties. It could get some income by selling passports, arranging to extradite criminals from foreign countries at the request of local rights enforcement agencies and similar enterprises. In addition, there would be some areas which a national defense agency would have the option of defending or not defending. Hawaii, to take an extreme example, could be excluded from the nuclear umbrella covering the mainland. Communities on the edges of the defended area, although necessarily protected from nuclear attack by any national defense system, could be defended or not defended against conventional attack. A national defense agency could go into these areas and inform those individuals and corporations who had the most to gain by being defended, like large landholders, insurance agencies, and the like, that they would have to pay a price for defense. In all of these ways, a national defense agency might raise enough money to finance national defense without taxation. Obviously, a system that depends on local agencies evolved for a different purpose, or a ramshackle system financed by charity, passport sales, and threats to Hawaiian insurance companies is economically very imperfect. So is a system financed by coercion and run by government. These arguments suggest that it may be possible to defend against foreign nations by voluntary means. I don't see how. They do not prove that it will be. I am only balancing one imperfect system against another and trying to guess which will work better. What if the balance goes the other way? What will I do if, when all other functions of our government have been abolished, I conclude that there is no effective way to defend against aggressive foreign governments except by national defense financed by taxes? Financed, in other words, by money taken by force from taxpayers. In such a situation, I would not try to abolish that last vestige of government. Exactly, that's what I'm talking about. I do not like paying taxes, but I would rather pay them to Washington than to Moscow. The rates are lower. I would still regard the government as a criminal organization, but one which was, by a freak of fate, temporarily useful. See, this is called a good scholar. All this while he was saying things that were seemingly absolutely insane to me personally. Now he is giving the other side of the argument that, yeah, well, this is how it might end up working. And this is where I think all of us would agree. It would be like a gang of bandits who occasionally, while occasionally robbing the villages in their territory, serve to keep off other and more rapacious gangs. The kind of group allegedly Gopal Patha ran. You see, this is why Hindu society in general, by default, organically is libertarian and decentralized. I do not approve of any government, but I will tolerate one so long as the only other choice is another and worse government. This is why. Meanwhile, I would do my best to develop voluntary institutions that might eventually take over the business of defense. That is what I meant when I said near the beginning of this book that I thought all government functions were divided into two classes: those we could do away with today and those we hope to be able to do away with tomorrow. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Thank you, David Friedman, for being rational and fair and not a rabid ideological dead rot of a brain. Right? This is true critical thinking. Beautiful. Navavimarsh is saying Dilip Ghosh has made a public comment, BJP runs in my blood. No one gives a shit anymore. Shekhar is saying, what are your views on tipping in restaurants? I can understand tipping in other services like traveling, but the restaurant is not something I personally understand. I do tip for some reason. I not every fucking time. Whenever I'm having some money troubles, like उस महीने में मेरा थोड़ा गाने अरेंजमेंट का काम कम आया या फिर कोई पेमेंट ड्यू है, मगर मैं रेस्टोरेंट चला गया हूँ, तब मैं टिप नहीं देता हूँ. नहीं तो देता हूँ, ऐसे ही just for a feeling of charity. Yeah, Ashkecham, he's not Puritan. I would have expected him to be Puritan because of the way he was arguing in the beginning, and then in the end says that yeah, but it's all imperfect, and I'm just comparing it to another imperfect system. And in the end, Moscow was the biggest fucking threat he knew at that point, and we know much bigger threats today. So, and then in the end, he ends up being fair. Beautiful. Rishabh is saying, bro has not met Indian dads, would give him a new view on tipping if he did. Yes, American tipping system is pretty fucked. It's a replacement. You are paying their salaries. But if that situation goes away and you don't pay, and restaurants are made to pay their salaries, like Bernie Sanders and AOC were advocating back in 2016-17, the restaurant charges will go up, and you'll end up paying the same thing pretty much, maybe more, because restaurant can't make you pay more than you can. Then you won't go to that restaurant. So I think you would end up paying pretty much the same only in terms of the food cost, the dish cost rising. Bhimta Republic came to existence. India is undone. और बोलते रहो, ये मत advocate करो, ये feasible नहीं है. Next chapter is called "In which prediction is reduced to speculation." In which prediction is reduced to speculation. Let's see. Excuse me. In the preceding chapters, I have described a particular kind of anarcho-capitalist society, complete with private rights enforcement agencies, private arbitration agencies, and perhaps private defense against Russia. That is certainly not the only kind of anarchist or even anarcho-capitalist society that could exist. In the first section of this book, I discussed the history of existing capitalist societies, but those are by no means the only kinds of societies that could exist under institutions of private property. Indeed, many of their institutions would have been impossible without the active support of government. Libertarian anarchy is only a very sketchy framework, a framework based on the idea of individual property rights, the right to one's own body, to what one produces, and to what others voluntarily give one. Within that framework, there are many possible ways for people to associate. Goods might be produced by giant hierarchical corporations like those that now exist. I hope not. It does not strike me as either an attractive way for people to live or an efficient way of producing goods. But other people might disagree. If so, in a free society, they would be free to organize themselves into such corporations, which are called castes. That is why I'm saying an anarcho-capitalist libertarian society is what Hindu society in general is. But today's Hindus, who are conceptually and philosophically speaking more Christian than actually really Sanatanis, they believe these ideas come from theology, because those fucking idiots don't understand that theology is an after fact. Hindu scriptures are an after fact. No one was living in a society and one fine morning someone writes a random smriti or shruti and then everyone starts following that word for word, you fucking idiot trads. What was happening in society was glorified in texts or criticized in texts. Goods might be produced by communes, group families, inside which property was held in common. Doesn't this sound familiar, guys? Where have you heard this before? That also does not seem to me to be a very attractive form of life. Exactly. I would not join one, but I would have no right to prevent others from doing so. Look at this. Isn't this sounding like me talking about negative rights in terms of caste identities? My own preference is for the sort of economic institutions which have been named, I think, by Robert Lefebvre. I think it might be pronounced somehow other. Under agoric institutions, almost everyone is self-employed. Instead of corporations, there are large groups of entrepreneurs related by trade rather than authority. Each sells not his time, but what his time produces. As a freelance writer, one of my professions, I am part of an agoric economic order. I have described one particular set of anarcho-capitalist institutions not because I am certain that they are the ones that will evolve if our government is slowly reduced to nothing, but in order to show that it is at least possible for voluntary institutions to replace government in its most essential functions. The actual arrangements by which the market provides an economic good, be it food or police protection, are the product of the ingenuity of all the entrepreneurs producing that good. It would be foolish for me to predict with any confidence that what will turn out to be the cheapest and most satisfactory ways of producing the services now produced by government. Even so, I am at least one step ahead of the Marxists who predict the eventual withering away of the state, but offer no real description, tentative or otherwise, of what a stateless society might be like. Well said. Next chapter is called Why Anarchy? Now let me have a bit of coffee and check out some comments again. Currently, federal minimum wage is $7.25. Not 15? Protoy Kundu, the question you are asking, the answer lies in your question. Protoy Kundu is asking, what do we do about Dilip Ghosh now? BJP owes a lot to him, an RSS lifetimer. So that is it. Yes, we will remember him that way. He is the one who brought BJP to where it is today in Bengal, but he didn't get his due and got pissed off and is now irrelevant to us. Do you want ANCAP for India? ANCAP is not one specific thing that applies to everything completely, okay? Ask me specific thing or specific topics, specific issues or specific policies. Anarcho-capitalism is not a unified ideology. But if we're talking about national defense and all, there to know. What happened with Dilip Ghosh? He got pissed off and has been giving hints that are doing things that are ending up benefiting Trinamool. He had been giving hints about him being pissed off ever since the 2021 pogrom against BJP party workers, activists, and even a candidate got killed. That was a genocide against BJP party workers. So ever since then, he was very pissed. He didn't get much ministerial positions and stuff. People much junior to him got ministerial positions as ministers of state, which means nothing in the fucking sense anyway, but get gigantic salaries and freebies from our taxes. So he had complained back then even that I will stand by my my party workers. I go to their funerals. I don't care about any PMO, etc. That was in 2022. And recently he got married at a time when Bengal society was about to hit a crescendo. A fever pitch was being reached on everyone kind of warming up to BJP because of how much they were pissed off with Trinamool, because of SSC scams, what was happening in Bangladesh, Murshidabad. All of that had accumulated in the minds of people. That was all they were seeing in the news all day on all news channels. Out of the blue, deliberately, I think, Dilip Ghosh decides to get married. And knowingly, he does it. And people from Trinamool and all congratulate him. The BJP state president, I don't know if he is officially the state president, but he kind of has the powers of the state president. Shukanta Majumdar, they all go to his house to congratulate him. Entire state's media, vernacular media's attention shifts to Dilip Ghosh's fucking marriage, and the complete discourse on Murshidabad, the protests, SSC scam is diluted, and it has not recovered as of now because now we are discussing Kashmir. Dilip Ghosh's marriage single-handedly fucked the discourse of Bengal, and Mamata Banerjee knows it. She congratulated him. She was very happy about it. And yesterday, with Mamata Banerjee inaugurating the Jagannath temple in Digha, Dilip Ghosh went to it with his wife. Gautam, yeah, I'm thinking about it, yes. Gautam is asking how many pages left. We are just about halfway through the book. Yeah, national security and sovereignty is the priority. हमारे और क्या करे? That's why even the Libertarian Party of India is saying, भाई national security, foreign policy में हमको BJP से कोई difference नहीं लाना है. Okay, let's continue now. Why anarchy? We're going to listen to the ideas anyway, right? It starts with a quote by quoted by Judge Gideon J. Tucker of New York in 1866. No man's life, liberty, or property are safe while the legislature is in session. Many libertarians advocate not anarchy but limited constitutional government, like us. In my discussion of the public good problem in national defense, I accepted their arguments to the extent of conceding that there might be circumstances in which voluntary institutions could not defend themselves against a foreign state. Under such circumstances, a limited government might perform a useful function. The same public good argument applies in varying degrees to things other than defense. Why then do I take as my objective a society of completely voluntary institutions? Would it not be better to have a severely limited government doing those few things which it could do better? Sorry, guys. Sorry for interrupting myself, but I have to tell you one other thing by Dilip Ghosh, which I sent to Mysterious Sociologist. I don't remember the exact quote, so I'll just check out the WhatsApp, okay? He said something insane just 3-4 days back before he went to the Jagannath temple inauguration, and after which everyone has now been saying that, oh, he's a Trinamool stooge. But just 3-4 days back, Mysterious Sociologist already said to me that I have right now no doubt that he is Trinamool Trojan horse because of something he said 3-4 days back. Okay, let me just tell you the exact thing he said. Something insane regarding Murshidabad. Okay, and criticizing Shubhendu. You won't believe this. You won't fucking believe this. Let me tell you. Yeah. He said, I'm not against burning of Pakistani flags in the country, and he targeted Shubhendu for doing it. Okay, let's continue. Why then do I take as my objective a society of completely voluntary institutions? Would it not be better to have a severely limited government doing those few things which it could do better? Perhaps it would be if the government stayed that way. Here we run into the problem discussed in chapter 4. One cannot simply build any imaginable characteristics into a government. Governments have their own internal dynamic. The internal dynamic of limited governments is something with which we, to our sorrow, have a good deal of practical experience. It took about 150 years, starting with a Bill of Rights that reserved to the states and the people all powers not explicitly delegated to the federal government, to produce a Supreme Court willing to rule that growing corn to feed to your own hogs is interstate commerce and can therefore be regulated by Congress. Suppose that a government is given the job of doing only those things that cannot be done well privately because of the public good problem. Someone, almost certainly the government, must decide what things those are. Practically, every economic activity has some element of public good. Writing this book will not only benefit those who are entertained by reading it, it will also, I hope, increase at least infinitesimally the chance that I and you will live in an increasingly free society. That is a public good. I cannot make America free for me without making it free for you, and even free for people so benighted as not to have bought this book. Does that mean that our ideal limited government should control the publishing industry? My judgment is no. The element of public good is small and the costs of public control enormous. The judgment of a government official with his eye on power and patronage might be different. The logic of limited governments is to grow. There are obvious reasons for that in the nature of government and plenty of evidence. Constitutions provide at the most a modest and temporary restraint. As Murray Rothbard has supposed to have said, the idea of a limited government that stays limited is truly utopian. Anarchy at least might work. Limited government has been tried. True, things evolve and evolve and evolve forever. Of course, one should ask the same questions about anarchist institutions. What is their internal dynamic? Of course, one should ask the same questions about anarchist institutions. What is their internal dynamic? Will private rights enforcement agencies, once established, continue as private profit-making concerns? Or will they conclude that theft is more profitable and become governments? Will the laws of private arbitration agencies be just laws, allowing individuals to pursue their own affairs without interference? Or will they allow self-righteous majorities to impose their will on the rest of us, as do many present laws? There is, after all, no absolute guarantee that the laws of an anarchist society will themselves be libertarian laws. Exactly. These are questions I attempted to answer in chapters 30 and 31. My conclusion was one of guarded optimism. Anarchist institutions cannot prevent the members of a sufficiently large and impassioned majority from forcing their prejudices into private law codes and so imposing them on the rest of us. He is slightly wrong. Anarchist institutions actually cannot prevent the members of a sufficiently small group as well, only if they are an impassioned group. Okay, even if they are sufficiently large, of course, yes, but impassioned minority can also do the forcing of their prejudices into private law codes and therefore impose them on the rest of us. But they make it far more difficult and expensive, and therefore more unlikely than under governmental institutions. Anarchist institutions cannot guarantee that protectors will never become rulers, but they decrease the power that protectors have separately or together, and they put at the head of rights enforcement agencies men who are less likely than politicians to regard theft as a congenial profession. For all these reasons, I believe that anarchist institutions, if they can be established and maintained, will be better than any government, even one initially limited and constitutional. I am willing to accept a slightly less than optimal production of a few public goods in exchange for the security of there being no government to expand into the 95% of human affairs where it can do nothing but damage. The ultimate objective of my political actions is not limited government, it is anarchy. At this point, another question is sometimes raised. We are a long way from the objective of a severely limited government and a longer way still from anarchy. Even if anarcho-capitalism is ideally a better system, is it not wise to focus on the more immediate goal of reducing the government and put off to the future any discussion of abolishing it? I think not. It is important to know what road we must take, but it is also important to know where we want to go. In order to understand our position ourselves and explain it to others, it helps to know what we ultimately want, not just what comprises we may be forced to accept. Exactly, the feasibility argument here. I suspect that one reason for the enormous success of the socialist ideas of 50 and 100 years ago, ideas which in many cases are the orthodoxy of today, was the willingness of socialists to be utopian. Their politics were Fabian, but their polemic was not. One reason for the enormous success of the socialist ideas of 50 and 100 years ago, ideas which in many cases are the orthodoxy of today, was the willingness of socialists to be utopian. Their politics were Fabian, but their polemic was not. Their vision of an ultimate perfection was one of the most effective weapons in the practical struggle. There are utopias and utopias. A utopia that will work only if populated by saints is a perilous vision. There are not enough saints. Such a vision, liberalism, socialism, call it what you will, we have followed. It has led us to where we now are. I have not tried to construct a utopia in that sense. I have tried to the best of my ability to describe plausible institutions under which human beings, not very different from ourselves, could live. Those institutions must evolve over a period of time, as did the institutions under which we presently live. Well said. They cannot be instantly conjured up from the dreams of an enthusiastic writer. The objective is distant, but not necessarily unreachable. It is well to know where one is going before taking even the first step. Well said. Revolution is the hell of it. Next chapter. It starts with a quote from H.L. Mencken. After a revolution, of course, the successful revolutionists always try to convince doubters that they have achieved great things, and usually they hang any man who denies it. Lol. Now we'll start the chapter. Let me have some water. Yes, Gautam. The case against violent revolution for an anarchist. The case against violent revolution for an anarchist is simple. Now, Gautam, by the way, since you are calling Gandhi an anarcho-primitivist and Nehru to theek hai, but you see, Gautam, therefore you'll have to confront those people who say libertarianism is inherently a foreign concept because of the English word libertarianism, lol. As if we can't fucking describe Indian things in English. So, the case against violent revolution for an anarchist is simple. Government exists ultimately because most people believe that it performs necessary functions. The most fundamental of these functions is protection against violence and disorder. When people view anarchy as the ultimate evil, it is not because they are concerned about mail not being delivered or streets not being cleaned. They are afraid of theft, murder, and rape, riot, and arson. The greater these fears, the greater the degree of government tyranny which people will tolerate, even support. Wow. Civil disorder leads to more government, not less. It may topple one government, but it creates a situation in which people desire another and stronger. Hitler's regime followed the chaos of the Weimar years. Russian communism is a second example, a lesson for which the anarchists of Kronstadt paid dear. Napoleon is a third. Yet many radicals and some anarchists talk and act as though civil disruption were the road to freedom. For those radicals whose For those radicals whose vision of freedom is a new government run by themselves, revolution is not a totally unreasonable strategy, although they may be overly optimistic in thinking that they are the ones who will end up on top, just like Savarkar didn't end up on top. Hindu Mahasabha disappeared. For those of us whose enemy is not just the current government but government itself, it is a strategy of suicide. Yet it is a strategy some anarchists advocate. What are their arguments? One is that civil disorder is educational. A government threatened by insurrection becomes more and more tyrannical, revealing itself to the populace in its true colors. The populace, thus radicalized, rises and abolishes the government. Experimentally, the truth of this argument, that revolution leads to repression and repression to freedom, is demonstrated by the thriving anarchist communities now occupying the territories once ruled by the oppressive governments of Russia, China, and the German Reich. Another more worthy argument for revolution is simple opportunism. There is going to be a revolution whether we like it or not. One must be on one side of the barricades or the other. What I just said in the beginning. You'll have to pick a side. If a libertarian does not support the revolution, he has only himself to blame if he witnesses its triumph from an exalted position intermediate between a lamppost and the street. Even if he escapes such a fate, he can hardly expect to influence the policy of the revolutionaries if he has not helped to make the revolution. Even on its own terms, this argument is unconvincing. Successful revolutionaries do occasionally end up in positions of power, but they seem more likely on the historical record to end up dead, courtesy of their comrades. In any case, the revolution has its own logic, and it is, like that of politics, a logic of power. So revolution, like politics, selects out for success those with desire and ability to wield power. Hence, Gandhi wins, Savarkar doesn't. A libertarian is defeated before the game starts, and by the time the revolution is successful, the population will want nothing so much as order and security. If those who began the revolution have scruples about providing what they want, someone else will be found to end it. The case seems better on purely opportunistic grounds for supporting counter-revolution. There are more old phalangists in Spain than old Bolsheviks in Russia. But the best policy of all, if there must be a revolution, is on moral as well as opportunistic grounds, neutrality. Climb into a hole, pull the hole in after you, and come out when people stop shooting each other. A third argument for revolution, one which may have had more influence than either of the others, is the argument from desperation. It holds that there are reasons intrinsic to our present situation which make it impossible to weaken or destroy the government by any actions within the system. The only possible strategy, however bleak its chances, is to destroy the system from the outside, whether by non-violent resistance or violent revolution. The crucial concept in this argument is the ruling class, the set of people who control the current institutions and benefit by that control. In the next chapter, I will try to deal with that concept. In the chapter after that, I will discuss strategies to achieve libertarian anarchy that seem more productive than revolution. The chapter ends with a quote from W.B. Yeats, a paragraph. Hurrah for revolution and more cannon shot. A beggar upon horseback lashes a beggar on foot. Hurrah, hooray for revolution and cannon come again. The beggars have changed places, but the lash goes on. Nice. Next chapter is called The Economics of Theft or the Non-Existence of the Ruling Class. Ash Ketchum is saying, do you know how the India's vaccine manufacturing pioneer fucked up? Shanta Biotech, founded by Varaprasad Reddy, adopted the workplace democracy and government stakes for all workers, and gave stakes for all workers when bankrupt in no time. He was influenced by his commie uncle from childhood. Abhay saying, then Saraswati Sarkar was right about Dilip Ghosh. Saraswati Sarkar, I don't know who that is and what she said. Who is Saraswati Sarkar? I don't know. Okay, 1.5 घंटा हो गया बैठा हूँ. Okay, let me take a 2-3 minute break and come back. She's on Twitter. What does she do? I mean, who is she? A random Twitter handle or a BJP person? Saraswati Sarkar, regionalist. I don't know her. Regionalist মানে কি মানে ওই বাংলা পক্ষ নাকি? Okay, the economics of theft or the non-existence of the ruling class. It starts with a quote from Mark Twain. It could probably be shown, quote, it could probably be shown by facts and figures that there is no distinctly American criminal class except Congress, meaning their parliament, said by Mark Twain, lol. Consider a free market society in which theft does not exist. Suppose that some change, social, technological, or whatever, suddenly makes theft possible. What is the overall effect? One might suppose that it would be simply a transfer of the amount stolen from one group of people to another. The victims become poorer and the thieves richer by the same amount. This is not true. People enter the profession of theft like any other profession until their numbers are sufficient to drive down the return from theft to the point where it is no more attractive than other professions available to them. Thieves end up working a normal 8-hour night and receive the same salary as other workers with the same talents employed elsewhere, allowing for such special businesses, such special business expenses as legal fees and time lost while imprisoned. The marginal thief, the man who finds it just barely in his interest to be a thief and would go straight if the returns of theft were just a little lower, is better off only to the extent that the added demand for his particular talents caused by the opening of opportunities in theft has slightly raised the salary those talents can command. The non-marginal thief, the man who happens to be better suited to theft or less suited to honest employment than most other thieves or potential thieves, benefits somewhat more, but even for him, the benefit is only a part of his income, since he could be spending the same effort earning somewhat less in a different profession. Meanwhile, the victims are worse off by the entire amount stolen, which is at least as great as the total wages of the thieves. In addition, they pay the cost of burglar alarms, police, and other expensive concomitants of theft. The net effect of theft has been not the transfer of income but the diversion of labor from productive to unproductive uses, reducing the total income of the members of the society by the amount stolen. If there is a plentiful supply of qualified thieves, or if the qualities required for theft are roughly the same as those required in other professions, the benefit to the thieves from the existence of theft will be small. If, in addition, the number of thieves is a sizable part of the population, the thieves themselves may be worse off because of the existence of theft. There is, after all, no honor among thieves. A man may return from a night of labor only to find that a fellow worker has paid him a call. In addition, meaning a fellow thief has now stolen in his own home. In addition, the price of the goods thieves buy is increased by the cost of insurance, guards, and the like necessitated by the thief by theft. Thieves themselves may lose more by theft than they make. If moderately rational, they might themselves prefer that theft be impossible. Exactly the same argument can be made for the fences, the ultimate purchasers of stolen property, and everyone else who at first appears to be benefited by theft. In each case, competition drives earnings down to the market rate, while some of the costs of theft are borne by those who appear to benefit by it. This analysis of private theft is useful for understanding the nature of government. Government consists largely of various forms of legalized theft. The same economic principles apply to it as to illegal theft. There is competition both for employment and for purchasing stolen goods. For example, competition for employment as politician and bureaucrat and so on, and for purchasing stolen goods in the case of lobbying for subsidies and other government favors. This competition drives down the income of both politicians and their customers until it reaches its market level. Just as with private theft, individuals are benefited only to the extent that their particular talents are peculiarly suitable for governmental professions. As with private theft, the wealth taken is mostly a net loss, not a transfer. If $1 million of the taxpayers' money is being handed out, the people competing for it are willing to and will spend most of $1 million to get it, just as a private thief will put in $20 worth of labor to steal $25 worth of loot. In addition, as with private theft, more resources are consumed by the cost of protection against government. Tax lawyers, inefficient allocation of labor, and capital in planning enterprises to minimize tax costs instead of to maximize real production, and so on. In the long run, society is probably poorer by more than the total amount stolen. Right. Just as private thieves may be injured by theft, it is possible that those who work in or through government may be injured by the existence of government. Indeed, it is probable, for the number of thieves is enormous. Virtually the entire population, to one degree or another, is using the government to steal something from someone. And the total amount stolen is a sizable fraction of the national income. It might be argued that the chief beneficiaries of government, in particular politicians, have no talent except for theft, and that the increase in their income resulting from the government's demand for that talent is therefore considerable. This argument is rhetorically satisfying but probably false. There is stiff competition for high office, and the men who win usually have considerable ability. Human ability is, I believe, quite generalizable. A man who is good at one thing usually can be good at others. If government were drastically reduced or eliminated, politicians could go into legitimate activities, perhaps as entertainers, perhaps as executives. Most politicians, if they had stayed out of politics, would probably be earning nearly as much as they were now, and if there were no politics, everyone's income would be much higher. The abolition of government, although it might lower the relative income of those who now are or would have become politicians, as politicians would, I suspect, raise their absolute income. This entire analysis, as the title of the chapter suggests, is intended to answer the argument that the government cannot possibly be abolished legally, since the people who control it since the people who control it profit by it, and since they control it, will not allow it to be destroyed by actions within the system. Such a ruling class analysis fails to explain government activities such as airline regulation, which consist mostly of destroying wealth, and the wealth of the rich at that. By imposing high airline fares, the CAB, उनका जो airline authority है, the CAB imposed a cost of about $2 billion a year on airline passengers. Many of them were surely members of the ruling class, if there was one. The airlines benefited by a small fraction of that amount. Their total net income was only about $500 million. If we assume that 40% of that income was a result of the CAB's activities, that all of that goes to members of the ruling class, and that fully half the money spent on airline fares is spent by students, low-income couples on honeymoons, and similar non-members of the ruling class, we still have the curious spectacle of a ruling class that steals $1 billion from itself and pays $800 million for the privilege. It seems more reasonable to suppose that there is no ruling class, and that we are ruled rather by a myriad of quarreling gangs constantly engaged in stealing from each other, to the great impoverishment of their own members as well as the rest of us. Casteism is so inevitable that in the end we are always in the middle of a war between two or more castes. The world is a caste battle going on, intercaste battle. Even if this is correct, there are still people who have sunk money into the existing system, have spent time and energy working their way into a profitable job, and thus have a short-run interest in maintaining that system. That should be only a transitional problem. Those people will fight fiercely against any attempt to abolish their jobs while they are in them, but they have no interest in preserving them for their successors. The abolition of government will take longer than the career of one generation of bureaucrats and politicians. This does not mean that we can achieve an anarchy by merely posting a few Xerox copies of this chapter around Capitol Hill and waiting for the congressmen to recognize their long-run interests. In the next two chapters, I suggest more practical and longer roads to freedom than that. But at least we can remove from our map one roadblock: the satanic ruling class, raking in the shekels with its right hand and stuffing the ballot box with its left. The idea sketched in this chapter was labeled rent-seeking in a later article by Ann Kruger. Its first appearance, so far as I know, was in an article by Gordon Tullock, The Welfare Cost of Tariffs, Monopoly and Theft, published a few years before I published my version. This is that famous rent-seeking. The right side of the public good trap. Let's see. That's the next chapter. Hello, Western political theory here. Why couldn't theft be required? Delineation, or is it specifically of crime and rule of law? Why doesn't bro just factor risk, opportunity, cost into the price? Have fun, buddy. See you in a century instead of being a huge bitch. So edgy, bro. Ashkacham is saying every new government welfare scheme is a politician bureaucrat new corruption scam through the laws. Satanic ruling class. The analysis, the analysis of public goods in chapter 34 and the discussion of meaning this is we are in chapter 39 right now, and the discussion of government viewed as a market in several other chapters make it possible to analyze the merits of government and anarchy in a new, or at least a more explicit fashion. Under a government, good law is a public good. That is why it is not produced. The concept of a public good originates in the economics of the market but applies to politics as well. Under our current institutions, people do, in a sense, buy laws. They bear various costs, such as going to the polls and voting, investigating the implications of different proposals on the ballot, and the voting patterns of different politicians, or supporting campaigns with time or money in order to influence legislation. Many discussions of democracy assume that these costs are essentially zero, that if 60% of the people want something, it will get done. But that is true only for very simple issues. More often, the cost of finding out what is really going on and influencing it is substantial. One cannot simply go to the polls and vote for the good guys. No candidate takes "I am a bad guy" as his campaign slogan. The political process can be viewed as a peculiar sort of economic process, intermediate between a grocery store and a horse race. Each voter decides what costs he is willing to bear in trying to get the laws he wants according to how likely his efforts are to succeed and how much he values succeeding. He buys law. And by the nature of the peculiar marketplace on which we buy law, we are likely to buy more bad law than good, because good law, like national defense, is a public good. A public good, you will remember, is something which, if produced at all, must be produced for all the members of a pre-existing group. It is difficult for the person who produces it to charge those who benefit, since he has no way of refusing the good to those who refuse to pay. For this reason, a public good may fail to be produced even when the cost of producing it is much less than its value. Since laws apply to everyone in their jurisdiction, whether or not he has worked or voted for them, good laws under governmental institutions are a public good and are consequently underproduced. Worse still, bad law is often less of a public good than good law. The result is that the laws of a government are worse, not better, than its citizens, in terms of their individual values and beliefs deserve. Consider a specific example. I have a choice of two ways of making $1,000. Both are political. The first way is to work for the repeal of an enormous number of different special interest laws. CAB, meaning the Airlines Board, ICC, I don't know what the ICC used to be in USA in 1973. So for example, CAB and ICC price fixing, agricultural subsidies, oil quotas, and so on ad nauseum, like India, each of which costs me from a few cents to a few $100s a year. The second way is by working to pass one more special interest law, which will benefit a small special interest of which I am a member and will cost everyone else a few dollars. I have no moral preference for one method over the other. I will choose the second. It is enormously easier to pass one law than to repeal 100. The first method not only benefits me, it benefits everyone else, but I get nothing from that. The second method benefits me and a few others and harms everyone else, but that costs me nothing. Even if I am just as willing to make money in a way that benefits others as in a way that harms them, the existence of governmental institutions make it enormously easier for me to do the latter. The result is that in a society such as ours, in which most people would rather produce than steal, we all spend a significant part of our time using the law to steal from each other. The theory of democracy may be, as Mencken said, that the common people know what they want and deserve to get it, good and hard. The practice of democracy is that people get something a good deal worse than they either want or deserve. So he's differentiating between the theory of democracy and the practical world of democracy. And so beautifully explained. The theory of democracy may be that the common people know what they want and deserve to get it good and hard. But the practice of democracy is that people get something a good deal worse than they either want or deserve. Never Good Stop is saying, Dada, what suggestions do you have for the Libertarian Party of India? Have you conveyed it to them? No, I haven't. I don't want to suggest to them anything. For now, let them disrupt, let them piss people off, let them shake some minds and turn a few heads. It's not it's now is not the time for feasibility and stuff. Patriot government is saying, how do Hindutva and your conceptions or primary texts on libertarianism manage the topic of human nature and society? It's too vague a question. Patriot government. In the US, liberal nationalism largely advocates for efficient but clumsy and largely external forms of commerce while embracing factionalism, which is largely enforced by a psychology of individual choice, alluding back to the core liberal nature of the United States. Yes. Any attempt to improve the society as a whole is caught in the same public good trap. Anything I do to make America freer will benefit everyone. The small part of that benefit going to me is rarely sufficient to justify my doing very much. This is an especially bitter dilemma for those libertarians who are objectivists. Improving the world mainly for the benefit of other people would be altruism, which they view on philosophical grounds as the ultimate evil. How we may succeed in working our way through that trap is the subject of the next chapter. The point I wish to make here is that once an anarchist society has been established, good law ceases to be a public good. Instead, it is bad law, more precisely, the reintroduction of government, which becomes a public good, or more precisely, a public bad. Since, under the anarcho-capitalist institutions I have described, each individual buys his own laws and gets the law he buys, law itself ceases to be a public good. Good law is still expensive. I must spend time and money determining which agency will best serve me. But having decided what I want, I get what I paid for. The benefit of my wise purchase goes to me, so I have an incentive to purchase wisely. It is now the person who wishes to reintroduce government who is caught in the public good problem. He cannot abolish anarchy and reintroduce government for himself alone. He must do it for everyone or for no one. If he does it for everyone, he himself gets but a tiny fraction of the benefit he expects the reintroduction of government to provide. He may be sufficiently altruistic to think it desirable that everyone receives the benefit of government, but he will hardly value every other person's receiving it as much as he values receiving it himself. Nobody is altruistic enough to be as happy about everyone in the country getting a penny as about himself getting $2 million. Meanwhile, the people who defend the anarchist institutions, individual consumers insisting on laws that leave them free to run their own lives, members of rights enforcement agencies protecting their clients from coercers, such as thieves, hoodlums, and altruists who want to set up governments, are all producing private goods and getting the benefit of what they produce. Let me repeat the argument once more. The producer of a public good can get only a part of the value of producing that good. Therefore, a public good is produced only if it is worth much more than it costs. Right. The producer of a private good gets virtually all the value by selling it for what it is worth usually, and so produces it whenever it is worth more than it costs. Thus, public goods are underproduced relative to private goods. Under the institutions of government, bad laws that benefit special interests at the expense of the rest of us, are private goods. More precisely, they are more nearly private goods than are good laws. They are more nearly private goods than are good laws, and good laws that benefit everyone, are public goods. Under an anarchy, good laws are private goods and bad laws are public goods. Public goods are underproduced. The citizens of a government get worse laws than they deserve. The inhabitants of an anarchy get better. It is no more than a slightly exuberant exaggeration to say that a government functions properly only if it is made up of exclusively saints, and an anarchy fails only if it is inhabited exclusively by devils. This argument should not be confused with the argument popularized by John Kenneth Galbraith that public goods, meaning goods produced by the government, are underproduced and that we should therefore have higher taxes and more government spending. In the technical sense in which I use the term, the benefits of increased government spending are usually less of a public good than the costs, since the taxes that pay for a given program are usually more more evenly distributed than the benefits of the program. The taxes that pay for a given program are usually more evenly distributed than the benefits of the program are evenly distributed. Lol. The amount of government spending is determined by the balance of costs and benefits in the amount of government spending is determined by the balance of costs and benefits in the political marketplace. Since the costs are more of a public good and thus have less weight in that marketplace than the benefits, there will be too much spending, not, as Galbraith argued, too little. Next chapter is called How to Get There from Here. Okay, let's check some comments. I'll have some water. I see market-based theory as needing to be more externalized than was achieved in Rawls and Locke, appreciative of various systems. Lol. It starts with a quote. You can't get it from here. Old joke, I hope. So the chapter is called How to Get There from Here, and it starts with a quote that says, you can't get there from here. Why don't we have libertarian anarchy? Why does government exist? The answer implicit in previous chapters is that government as a whole exists because most people believe it is necessary. Most particular government activities beyond the most fundamental exist because they benefit some special interest at the cost of the rest of us. At the cost of the rest of us. Each special interest will fight, in most cases successfully, to protect its private racket. Yet the individuals who make up that special interest are on the receiving end of everyone else's racket. Most of them lose on net by the whole transaction. To the extent that they realize this, they should support general reductions in government power. So the fundamental task is one of education. The obvious way to educate is to write books, give speeches, argue with friends, use all available means of communication to spread libertarian ideas. That is the strategy on which I concentrate my efforts, hence this book. It is not the only strategy. Showing is an effective way of teaching. People believe what they see. If it is the government that protects them from crime, delivers the mail, builds the streets, they will naturally conclude that without government, these things will not get done. The most effective way to demonstrate that these things can be done privately is to do them. So a second strategy is the development of alternative institutions, the skeleton of anarcho-capitalism within the structure of contemporary society. UPS is doing it for a postal service. Similarly, private arbitrators have to some degree replaced government courts. In chapter 18, I suggested ways of hastening that process. Private protection is already a big business. More than 1/3 of all expenditure for protection against crime goes to private firms, and a majority of all security personnel are private. Some housing developments are now being built complete with their own security systems. Exactly. At some point, if this trend continues, voters will find themselves protected almost entirely by private services paid for out of their own pockets, while also paying taxes for fat cops with their kids hanging from their shoulders and standing on the railway platform. They will be understandably reluctant to pay a second time in taxes for a superfluous police force, just as parents whose children go to parochial schools are reluctant to vote for school taxes. Even if these strategies succeed, government will continue for some decades to wield enormous powers and spend huge sums. Fortunately, politicians, although usually in favor of expanding their own power, are not motivated by any altruistic desire to guarantee the oppression of our grandchildren. It may often be possible to propose a step that benefits an incumbent politician in the short run but reduces the total power of government in the long run. An example is the voucher plan described in chapter 10. It has been supported in a limited form by a number of powerful politicians, including at least one governor. I do not credit the governor with a passionate dedication to reducing the power of his office merely with the desire to use Catholic votes to keep such power as he already had. Another example is the Minicity proposal discussed in chapter 17. For reasons given there, it might be in the interest of the governors of several large states. So a third strategy is to create and support proposals which are in the short run interest of some present politicians and in the long run interest of the rest of us. I have said nothing about direct political action, such as running libertarian candidates. I believe that although that may be a way of getting attention for libertarian ideas, it serves no other purpose. People get more or less the politicians they want. Some would say the politicians they deserve. If the voters become so libertarian that they will only elect candidates who abolish each office as they leave it, such candidates will be found. If the voters want a powerful government, a few libertarians in Congress will not stop them. I have described what should be done, but not who should organize and control it. I have not said who should command the libertarian legions. The answer, of course, is no one. One of the central libertarian ideas is that command hierarchy is not the only way of getting things done, usually not even the best way. Having rejected politics as a way of running the country, there is no reason for us to accept politics as the way to run the conspiracy to abolish politics. If this society is made freer, it will be done by a large number of people working individually or in small groups. I see no reason why we should all be part of some hierarchical group, some political party or libertarian conspiracy, modeled on the political institutions we are fighting against. Better, surely, for us to cooperate through the sorts of institutions we are fighting for, the institutions of the market. A market has room for firms of varying sizes. The Society for Individual Liberty, one of the older libertarian organizations, is a firm in the business of selling libertarian literature, publishing a magazine, arranging speeches and conferences, and coordinating libertarian activities. It has things called chapters, but their members are in no way the constituents of a political organization. SIL is the personal property of, I think, 4 people who started it and run it. That should, I hope, keep its internal politics down to manageable size. An example of libertarian organization on a larger scale is the Libertarian Party. Like other political parties, it runs candidates for local, state, and national office. Its greatest success so far are the election of 2 representatives to the Alaska State Legislature. Its most successful presidential candidate got about 1 million votes. Some libertarians regard it as a serious political party designed eventually to win national elections. Others, myself included, regard it as a way of getting publicity for libertarian ideas. The market for liberty has room for small firms as well. I am not an active member of any libertarian organization. I write articles and give speeches and get paid for it. I do not have to worry about whether a majority of libertarians approve of me. I do not hold any office they can vote me out of. I only have to please my customers. When I used to give speeches in favor of abolishing the draft, there was a dirty word that kept cropping up. Draft meaning drafting in the military, okay? There was a dirty word that kept cropping up, mercenary. A mercenary, as far as I could figure it out, was someone who did something because he wanted to. A soldier who fought for money, or glory, or patriotism, or fun. The opposite of a mercenary was a draftee, someone who fought because if he did not, he would be put in jail. According to that definition, there are only 2 kinds of people, mercenaries and slaves. I am a mercenary. If this this chapter ends with a quote. If this country is worth saving, it's worth saving at a profit. By H.L. Hunt. A small postscript is given to this chapter. It's called Postscript for Perfectionists. Whenever I give a speech or write an article, I am struck by how much I leave out. Okay, Deepak Chaudhary is saying libertarians are useful idiots. And yes, and people who are supporters of BJP who say that no, libertarianism can't happen because it's not feasible. They are useful idiots for BJP in their doing away with individual liberty or any kind of direction of not being completely drowned in casteism. Anyway, whenever I give a speech or write an article, I am struck by how much I must leave out. I always think that if only I were writing a book, I could say everything. I have now written a book and I'm forced to conclude that if only I were writing an encyclopedia, ... I therefore close by commenting on what I have not said. I have said almost nothing about rights, ethics, good and bad, right and wrong, although these are matters central to the ideas of most libertarians, myself included. Instead, I have couched my argument throughout in terms of practicality. I have asked not what people should want, but how we can accomplish those things which most of us do want. I have done this for 2 reasons. I am very much surer where I stand, where my arguments come from, and where they will lead me, with regard to practical questions than with regard to ethical ones. And I have found that it is easier to persuade people with practical arguments than with ethical arguments. This leads me to suspect that most political disagreement is rooted in questions of what is, not what should be. I have never met a socialist who wanted the kind of society that I think socialism would produce. Exactly. Next, there's a poem written by him only. It's called For Libertarians, an expanded postscript, but in the form of a poem, okay? Don't write a book, my friends, on either hand. Know more than I about my deepest views. Ernst van den Haag believes it's simply grand. I'm a utilitarian, that's news. I didn't know I was. Some libertarians can spot sheep's clothing at 1,000 yards. I do not use right arguments, read theirs, nor cheer them loudly as they stack the cards. Assuming your conclusions is a game that two can play at, so is a bomb or a gun. Preaching to the converted leads to fame. In narrow circles, I have found better fun. In search of something that might change your mind. The stakes my own and yours, if so inclined. Holy shit! What the fuck did he just say in the last 4 sentences? Fuck. Fuck. This so describes my vision. Oh, fuck. I'll just mark it as CSK. I'm going to copy paste these 4 lines everywhere from now on, along with Asindu Sindhu Paryanta. Preaching to the converted leads to fame in narrow circles. I've found better fun in search of something that might change your mind. The stakes my own and yours, if so inclined. Next chapter is called Problems. Let me check some comments and drink a bit of coffee. Srijan is saying, my cousin from 9th grade asked me if caste system was really evil as claimed by many historians and sociologists. I explained him using references like Varna system. Since then, I'm wondering how to explain caste and history to a young person. First of all, you have to say that if that system was evil, we are still living in the middle of evil today. It's not gone away. It will never go away. Objectively, theoretically, probably yes, but practically inevitable. It was not distinctly evil. That's all. Bhushanidhi is saying, I don't think anyone is a useful idiot, neither BJP nor libertarians. No, BJP is not useful idiot. BJP's supporters who say don't advocate this and that because it's not feasible for Narendra Modi, they are the useful idiots for Narendra Modi. They are steering the country in a certain direction, not the ones who are saying that it's not feasible. The problem is our opposition is compromised to foreign forces. Do you think the caste census is a cover for NRC? No, I don't think so. I think this is going to push the narrative of their existing casteism between Christians and Muslims as well. Oh, in that sense. Holy shit. I don't think so it can work. Leftist liberal mind is equal to LLM. Lol. Okay, let's continue. The problems. Many libertarians appear to believe that libertarianism can be stated as a simple and convincing moral principle from which everything else follows. Popular candidates are, it is always wrong to initiate coercion, and everyone has the absolute right to control his own property, provided that he does not use it to violate the corresponding rights of others, etc. If they are right, then the obvious way to defend libertarian proposals is by showing that they follow from the initial principle. One might even argue that to defend libertarian proposals on the grounds that they have desirable consequences, as I have done throughout this book, is not only a waste of time, but a dangerous waste of time, since it suggests that one must abandon the libertarian position if it turns out that some coercive alternative works better. One problem with reducing libertarian conclusions from simple libertarian principles is that simple statements of libertarian principles are not all that compelling. Lots of people are in favor of initiating coercion, or at least of doing things that libertarians regard as initiating coercion. Despite occasional claims to the contrary, libertarians have not yet produced any proof that our moral position is correct. A second problem is that simple statements of libertarian principle taken literally can be used to prove conclusions that nobody, libertarian or otherwise, is willing to accept. If the principle is softened enough to avoid such conclusions, its implications become far less clear. It is only by being careful to restrict the application of our principles to easy cases that we can make them seem at the same time simple and true. The easiest way to demonstrate this point is with a few examples. In order to define coercion, we need a concept of property, as I pointed out at the beginning of this book, some way of saying what is mine and what is yours. The usual libertarian solution includes property rights in land. I have the absolute right to do what I want on my land, provided that I refrain from interfering with your similar right on your land. But what counts as interfering? If I fire 1,000 megawatt laser beam at your front door, I am surely violating your property rights, just as I would be if I used a machine gun. But what if I reduce the intensity of the beam, say to the brightness of a flashlight? If you have an absolute right to control your land, then the intensity of the laser beam should not matter. Nobody has a right to use your property without your permission, so it is up to you to decide whether you will not put up with any particular invasion. So far, many will find the argument convincing. The next step is to observe that whenever I turn on a light in my house or strike a match, the result is to violate the property rights of my neighbors. Anyone who can see the light from his own property, whether with the naked eye or a powerful telescope, demonstrates by doing so that at least some of the photons I produced have trespassed onto his property. If everyone has an absolute right to the protection of his own property, then everyone within the line of sight of me can enjoin me from doing anything at all which produces light. Under those circumstances, my ownership of my property is not worth very much. A similar problem arises with pollution. Libertarians sometimes claim that since polluting the air over anyone else's property is a violation of his property rights, pollution can be forbidden in a libertarian society except when the polluter has the consent of the owners of all affected land. The argument is used to attack schemes such as effluent fees, which are designed to limit pollution to its economically efficient level, the point at which further reductions cost more than they are worth, but not to eliminate it. Here again, the problem is that an absolute right to control one's property proves too much. Carbon dioxide is a pollutant. It is also an end product of human metabolism. If I have no right to impose a single molecule of pollution on anyone else's property, then I must get the permission of all my neighbors to breathe. Unless I promise not to exhale. The obvious response is that only significant violations of my property rights count. But who decides what is significant? If I have an absolute property right, I am the one who decides what violations of my property matter. If someone is allowed to violate my property with impunity as long as he does no significant damage, we are back to judging legal rules by their consequences. A similar problem arises if we consider effects that are small not in size but in probability. Suppose I decide to play Russian roulette with one small innovation. After putting one cartridge in my revolver and spinning the cylinder, I point it at your head instead of mine before pulling the trigger. Most people, libertarian or otherwise, would agree that you have every right to knock the gun out of my hand before I pull the trigger. If doing something to someone, in this case shooting him, is coercive, then so is an action that has some probability of doing that something to him. But what if the revolver has not 6 chambers but 1,000 or 1,000,000 chambers and there is one bullet? The right not to be coerced, stated as an absolute moral principle, should still apply. If libertarianism simply consists of working out the implications of that right, it seems to imply that I may never do anything which results in some probability of injuring another person without his consent. I take off from an airport in a private plane with a cruising radius of 1,000 miles. There is small probability that my instruments will fail, or I will fall asleep, or for some other reason I will go wildly off course. There is some probability that the plane, having gone off course, will crash. There are things I can do which will reduce these probabilities, but not to zero. It follows that by taking off, I impose some small probability of death and destruction on everyone through whose roof I might crash. It seems to follow from libertarian principles that before taking off, I must get permission from everyone living within 1,000 miles of my starting point. So see, a great criticism of libertarianism coming from the son of Milton Friedman himself. I am not claiming that libertarians who argue from rights rather than from consequences believe that you cannot light a match on your own property or fly an airplane or breathe out. Obviously, they do not. My point is that simple statements of libertarian rights taken literally lead to problems of this sort. One can avoid such results by qualifying the statements, saying that they apply only to significant violations of my rights or violations that really injure me, or that by breathing and turning on lights and doing other things that impose tiny costs on others, I am implicitly giving them permission to do the same to me. But once one starts playing the game, one can no longer use rights arguments to draw clear conclusions about what should or should not happen. People who believe in taxes can argue just as plausibly that taxes do not really injure you, since the benefits they produce more than make up for the cost, or that everyone implicitly consents to taxes by using government services. The longer I have thought about these issues, the more convinced I have become that arguments about fundamental moral principles do not provide answers to enough important questions. In particular, they provide no answer and no way of getting an answer to a whole range of questions about where to draw lines. It seems obvious that we want property rules that prohibit trespass by 1000 megawatt laser beams and machine gun bullets, but not by flashlights and individual carbon dioxide molecules. But how, in principle, do you decide where along that continuum the rights of the property owner stop? We want rules that prohibit me from demonstrating my marksmanship by shooting a rifle at flies hovering around your head, but do not prohibit all airplane flights. We want rules that prohibit trespass by elephants, but not by satellites orbiting 10,000 miles over my roof. One tempting approach to such issues is to try to go back to the origin of property in land. If we know how I acquired ownership of land, we might also know how what that ownership consists of. Unfortunately, we do not know how I acquired ownership to land. John Locke, several centuries ago, suggested that we acquire land by mixing our labor with it, but did not explain how, when I clear a piece of forest, I acquire not only the increased value due to my efforts, but complete ownership over the land. How, in particular, do I acquire the right to forbid you from walking across the land, something you could have done even if I had never cleared it? Because for my not very satisfactory attempt to deal with this issue, see chapter 57. Okay. Later libertarian theorists have suggested other grounds for establishing ownership in land, such as claiming it or marking its boundaries. But no one, so far as I know, has presented any convincing reason why, if land starts out belonging equally to everyone, I somehow lose my right to walk on it as a result of your loudly announcing that it is yours. It is easy enough to show reasons why the conversion of common property into private property is a good thing, why it makes us better off. But it is very much harder to derive property in land from some a priori theory of natural rights. That is why, at the beginning of this book, I considered that the basis of property in unproduced resources, such as land, is shaky, and argued that it does not matter very much, since only a small fraction of the income of a modern society is derived from such resources. The problems I have discussed so far are all associated with the definition of property rights to land. A host of similar problems arise in specifying the rules of a legal system designed to enforce libertarian rights in a libertarian way. A criminal trial rarely, if ever, produces a certainty of guilt. If you jail or fine someone after concluding that there is a 98% chance that he has committed a crime, there remains a 2% chance that you are violating the rights of someone who is innocent. Does that mean that you can never punish anyone unless you are 100% certain he is guilty? If not, how in principle do libertarian moral principles tell you what degree of proof should be necessary for conviction and punishment? Once someone is convicted, the next question is what you can legitimately do to him. Suppose I have stolen $100 from you. If all you are allowed to do is take your money back, then theft is an attractive profession. Sometimes I am caught and give the money back. Sometimes I am not caught and keep it. Heads I win, tails I break even. In order to prevent theft, you must be able to take back more than what was stolen. And this is something that idiots in India don't get in terms of their discussions on Pakistan. It's a state failure. Just protect people. They come to kill you, you kill them back, or keep on protecting and their efforts of killing you go on. You don't go to Pakistan and change the behavior, because not all Pakistanis are bad. So, in order to prevent theft, you must be able to take back more than what was stolen. But how much more? When I raised that question once in a talk to a libertarian audience, I was told that it had already been answered by a prominent libertarian that you are entitled to take back exactly twice what is stolen. Twice what is stolen. Let me mark this page as Pakistan. That was many years ago, but nobody yet has given me a reason why it should be twice. 2 is a nice number, but so is 3, and there may be much to be said for 4 or 10 or 100. The problem is not to invent answers, but to find some way of deriving them. I could continue with a wide range of other problems for which the natural rights approach to libertarianism offers, so far as I can tell, no solution. I would prefer instead to suggest a different criticism of that approach. Even if we ignore situations that involve vanishingly small rights violations, the usual statements of libertarian principle imply conclusions that almost nobody, libertarian or otherwise, believes in. Yeah, this book is mostly out of stock. It was in stock just for a while. I had been searching it for 2 years. Let me take a break. I need to drink some water. Japan করে না কাস্টshi, even though they had caste-like system. No, traditional castes don't exist. Modern status groups exist. Whatever status groups do between each other, that is caste behavior, casteism. The good or bad, or the neutral. This Godia Isrisal argument of this will divide Muslims into caste also, like, bro. Yeah. They might not get divided, but more and more academics will have to at least admit it, and therefore the alleged benefit is very, very removed. It's 6-7 layers indirectly removed, so there might be some gain. Yeah, so in that sense we are hardcore looking for a way to justify it. Otherwise it's just election games. Much like our nuclear policy, no first strike, but when struck, expect massive and disproportionate retaliation. That should be with any terrorist attack that's based out of Pakistan. My coffee is almost over. Shit. Consider the following example. A madman is about to open fire on a crowd. If he does so, numerous innocent people will die. The only way to prevent him is to shoot him with a rifle that is within reach of several members of the crowd. The rifle is on the private property of its legitimate owner. Here is a well-known misanthrope who has publicly stated on numerous occasions that he is opposed to letting anyone use his rifle without his permission, even if it would save hundreds of his lives. Two questions now arise. The first is whether members of the crowd have a right to take the rifle and use it to shoot the madman. The answer of libertarian rights theory, as I understand, is no. The owner of the rifle is not responsible for the existence of the madman, and the fact that his rifle is temporarily of enormous value to other people does not give them a right to take it. The second question is whether it is desirable that someone take the rifle and use it to shoot the madman. Whether, to put it more personally, I wish that someone do so, or would rather see the members of the crowd stand there and be shot down. The answer to this question seems equally unambiguous. If someone takes the rifle, there is a relatively minor violation of the legitimate rights of its owner. If no one does, there is a major violation of the legitimate rights not to be killed of a large number of victims, plus a substantial cost in a human life and human pain. If asked which of these outcomes I would prefer to see, the answer is obviously the first. This result is not in any strict sense paradoxical. An outcome may be desirable even though there is no morally legitimate way of achieving it. Indeed, this possibly is implied by the idea, due to Nozick, of viewing libertarian rights as side constraints within which we seek to achieve some objective. The constraints would be relevant unless there were some circumstances in which we could better achieve the objective by ignoring them. Srijan is saying the lower caste Muslims still consider Sayyid and Khans as their boss and write in their orders. Yes. Roti kapda makan nahi chahiye, AR-15 chahiye. Yes. It will delusion them from casteism being the original sin of exclusively Hinduism that can only achieve salvation by constant reformation on the lighter. Yeah, but way down the line, not in the near future, or not immediately, but it will have to be after a lot of discourse happens. तो वो उसके लिए मतलब वो डिस्कोर्स करवाने के लिए भी कास्ट सेंसस नेसेसरी नहीं था, वो डिस्कोर्स वैसे भी हो सकता था. One solution to this problem is to reject the idea that natural rights are absolute. Potential victims have the right to commit a minor rights violation, compensating the owner of the gun afterwards to the best of their ability in order to prevent a major one. Another is to claim that natural rights are convenient rules of thumb which correctly describe how one should act under most circumstances, but that in sufficiently unusual situations, one must abandon the rules of thumb and make decisions in terms of the ultimate objectives which they were intended to achieve. A third response is to assert that the situation I have described cannot occur, that there is some natural law guaranteeing that rights violations will always have bad consequences, and that committing one rights violation can never decrease the total of rights violations. All of these positions lead to the same conclusion. Under some circumstances, rights violations must be evaluated on their merits rather than rejected a priori on conventional libertarian natural rights grounds. Those who believe that rights violations are always undesirable will be sure that the result of the evaluation will be to reject the violation, but that does not mean that they can reject arguments to the contrary without first answering them. Any such argument claims to provide a counterexample to their general theorem. If one such counterexample is true, the general theorem must be false. I have made my point so far in terms of an issue created for the purpose. Whether or not to steal rifles in order to shoot madmen is not a burning issue in libertarian or other circles. I will now carry the argument a step further by defending one of the particular heresies which it is widely believed no libertarian can support, that under some conceivable circumstances, conscription would be desirable, meaning mandatory military service. Suppose we are threatened with military conquest by a particularly vicious totalitarian government. If the conquest is successful, we shall all lose most of our freedom and many of us will lose our lives. It is claimed that only a draft can protect us. Two replies are possible. The first is that since coercion is always wrong, we should reject the draft whatever the consequences. I have tried to show that that answer is not satisfactory. At the most, it should lead us to refuse to enforce a draft ourselves while hoping that someone with fewer principles imposes one for us. Temporary slavery is, after all, better than permanent slavery. The other possible reply is to deny that the draft is necessary. This can be done in many ways. The Economist is inclined to argue that collecting taxes in cash and using them to hire soldiers is always more efficient than collecting taxes in labor. Collecting taxes in cash and using them to hire soldiers is always more efficient than collecting taxes in labor. The moralist may claim that a society whose members will not voluntarily defend it is not worth defending. I have myself used the first argument many times and believe that in the circumstances presently facing the US, it is correct. But the question I am currently concerned with is not whether under present circumstances or even under likely circumstances, a draft is desirable. The question is whether under any conceivable circumstances it should be. The answer is yes. Imagine a situation in which the chances of a soldier being killed is so high that a rational individual concerned chiefly with his own welfare will refuse to volunteer even at a very high wage. Imagine further that the percentage of the population required to defeat the enemy is so large that there are not enough patriotic or altruistic or adventure-loving or unreasonably optimistic recruits available. In order to win the war, the army must also include selfish individuals with a realistic view of the costs and benefits to themselves of joining the army. Recruiters and preachers will, of course, point out to such individuals that if everyone refuses to fight, we will be conquered and they will be worse off than if everyone volunteers to fight. The individual will reply correctly that he only determines what he does, not what everybody else does. If everyone else volunteers, he can stay safely at home. If nobody else volunteers and he does, he will almost certainly be killed and if not killed, enslaved. Under such circumstances, an army could be recruited without a draft by paying very high salaries and financing them with taxes so high that anyone who does not volunteer starves to death. The coercion of a tax is then indistinguishable from the coercion of a draft. While a libertarian may still argue that to impose either a draft or a tax is immoral and that he himself would refuse to do so, I find it hard to see how he can deny that, under the circumstances I have hypothesized, he would rather see himself and everyone else temporarily enslaved by his own government than permanently enslaved by someone else's. The point of this argument is not that we should have a draft. As it happens, I not only believe that under present circumstances, a draft is a bad thing, I also believe that if the government has the power to impose a draft, it is much more likely that it will use it when it should not, than the rather unlikely circumstances I have described will occur. That is, however, a practical argument that depends on the circumstances of a particular time and place, not an argument of principle that would apply everywhere and everywhen. Perhaps what these examples show is not that we cannot accept a simple statement of libertarian principle, but only that I picked up the wrong one. Perhaps we should replace a statement about what one should do, that is, never initiate coercion, that as libertarians say, with a statement about what objective one should seek. For example, do whatever minimizes the total amount of coercion. So it's all about degrees in the end. Both seizing the rifle and imposing a draft are then, in the particular circumstances I have described, not only consistent with libertarian principle, but required by it. So redefining libertarian principles. While I cannot speak for other libertarians, I find that this version of libertarianism does not always fit my moral intuition. Suppose the only way I can stop someone from stealing $200 from me is by stealing your $100 rifle, which you are unwilling to lend or sell me, and using it to defend myself. The result is to reduce the total amount of coercion, at least if we measure amount by value of what is stolen. Yet it seems, at least to me, that stealing the rifle is still wrong. A second problem with this approach is that it is of no help when we must choose between a small cost in coercion and an enormous cost in something else. Suppose you happen to know that everyone else in the world is going to die tomorrow by some natural catastrophe, say the Earth colliding with a large asteroid, unless you prevent it. Further, suppose that the only way to prevent it involves stealing a piece of equipment worth $100 from someone who, in your opinion, rightfully owns it. Your choice is simple. Violate libertarian principles by stealing something, or let everyone die. What do? You cannot justify stealing as a way of minimizing total coercion. Being killed by an asteroid is not coercion since it is not done by a person. After the asteroid strikes, there will be no more coercion ever again, since there will be no one left to either coerce or be coerced. Speaking for myself, the answer is that I steal. When I put such questions to other libertarians, one common response is a frantic attempt to reinterpret the problem out of existence. One example might be the reply that, since the person you are stealing from will himself be killed if you do not take the device, he would be in favor of your taking it, so you are not really stealing but using the device in the way he would want you to if he knew what you knew. Actually, fair enough. Another response might be that you should not steal the equipment because your belief that doing so will save the world may be wrong. Fair enough. Both arguments are actually pretty good. All such evasions are futile. I can always alter the assumptions to force the issue back to its original form. Perhaps the owner of the device agrees that using it is necessary if the world is to be saved, but he is old, tired of living, and not very fond of his fellow humans. Perhaps the situation is so clear that everyone agrees that without your act of theft, we shall all die. Our response to such questions demonstrates that we do not really believe in simple single values. Most libertarians, myself included, myself among them, believe that a libertarian society is both just and attractive. It is easy enough to claim that we are in favor of following libertarian principle, whatever the consequences, given that we believe the consequences would be the most attractive society the world has ever known. But the claim that we put individual rights above everything else is for most of us false. Although we give some value, perhaps very great value, to individual rights, we do not give them an infinite value. Nothing in the world is of infinite value, guys, remember. We can pretend the contrary only by resolutely refusing to consider situations in which we might have to choose between individual rights and other things that are also of great value. My purpose is not to argue that we should stop being libertarians. My purpose is to argue that libertarianism is not a collection of straightforward and unambiguous arguments establishing with certainty a set of unquestionable propositions. It is rather the attempt to apply certain economic and ethical insights into a very complicated world. The more carefully one does so, the more complications one is likely to discover and the more qualifications one must put on one's results. Next chapter is called Where I Stand. A break for coffee. These page marks are nice, they are magnets. Even though this does not even bring smoke out of your mouth, this is so beautiful, just feels so nice in the mouth. Rugo is saying, I don't say this to defend BJP, I'm more so against Jitni Abadi Utna Haq, but won't a caste census help to show the meager population of evil Brahmins and their actual economical political power? That's already known. Brahmin population is 4%. Yes, Rishabh, that's what she said. Rugo is saying, sorry, this is not related to the topic. Yeah. Why do you like Friedrich Nietzsche? Because he argues against sentimentalism. He is fully in favor of practicality. He does not believe in naming, conjuring up random nice things and calling them morals. And he does not believe in, or his ideas don't further the soft bigotry of low expectations thing. Well, Nietzscheism, see, Gautam, Nietzscheism is a tool, an instrument, or a steroid, a superpower. It is up to the person how will they use it. Some people say Hitler was Nietzschean, and some people say that Savarkar liked Nietzsche because he was also Hitler-like. Savarkar is not all that proven, but and then some people apologize that no, Hitler read a mistranslation of a bad translation of Nietzsche. I would say that he used Nietzscheism according to his own goals and his own vision of the world. He hated Jews and used Nietzscheism to that extent, in that way. It's a tool that can go both ways. It's a weapon, but it is a very, very effective weapon. The problem with our society is that as a facade, people like facades, and everyone is going about wielding Christian morality. A society of the week, for the week, by the week, and therefore harming the society, creating a situation where everyone either leaves or wants to leave the country as soon as possible. But interestingly, none of the people pushing Christian morality down our throats and making the society a society for the week, of the week, by the week. It's not really by the week. There I'm wrong. All those people themselves are Nietzscheans. No successful politician in the history of mankind has not been a Nietzschean. Otherwise, they would not be successful politicians. तो ये भोसरी वाले स्वीट डायलॉग सिर्फ इनका क्या होगा एक्सेट्रा, वो चुतिया मॉडलिटी हमके लिए, हमारे लिए बचा के रखे हैं. उनके जगत में उनके सर्वाइवल के लिए लौड़े सिर्फ निज्जा ही है. Nietzsche was never anti-Semitic. Yes, Hitler used it according to his own vision. Nietzsche is all about unbridled truth, unmasked reality, and no sugarcoating of things. I believe Nietzsche had the blessings of Bhairava with him. Bhairava was putting ideas into his head. Hegdewar also read Nietzsche. This is such a dumb argument. Then let's stop talking about Darwin as well. Hitler also used him as a justification. Yeah. I actually, Rishabh, thanks for making this point. The day, remember, we found out from Janki Bakle's book that Savarkar's main influences were Darwin and Nietzsche. I showed it to a very, very senior sociologist, not mysterious sociologist, another very senior sociologist, very insanely qualified. No one knows that he's a right-winger, okay? He is absolutely a Trojan horse in the left wing. He is in an elite West European institution. So he said that this is actually a criticism. because they are trying to equate Savarkar with Hitler. That's why they are saying that, oh, he was such a fan of Darwin and Nietzsche. Rishi saying, bro, touch some grass. I did all my day's work started when your stream began. By the way, everyone needs to read Sitaram, needs to Sitaram Goel pilled. Political leaders are not Nietzschean but dynastic and opportunist. Sounds Nietzschean to me. They are using the Nietzschean worldview, Nietzschean way of doing things for their benefit, which is dynastism and opportunism. I'm not fan of Nietzsche. Why? You see Nietzscheism or even Buddhism in ways that is antithetical to their original intent, Hitler's act and Buddhist warrior monks. Have there been any followers of any ideology that never strayed? No. Enigmatic sociologist, lol. Nietzsche quite hard to type without autocorrection because of capitalism. Yes, man. Interesting new chapter. It's called Where I Stand. In the previous chapter, I argued that simple statements of libertarian principle lead to unacceptable conclusions and must therefore be rejected. There is no obvious logical inconsistency in a moral principle that implies that nobody should be permitted to breathe, but it is not a principle that many people are likely to accept. One possible response is that libertarianism is an absolute principle, an ultimate value which cannot be overridden, but that it is not adequately expressed by the simple statements I have been attacking. If those statements are only approximations to a much more complicated and subtle description of libertarian principle, it is hardly surprising that the approximation sometimes breaks down in difficult situations. This is a view with which I have a good deal of sympathy, but it is not very useful for answering real-world questions, at least until someone manages to produce an adequate statement of what libertarian principles really are. Moral philosophy is a very old enterprise and its rate of progress has not been rapid in recent centuries. So I do not plan to hold my breath while I wait. Yes, I don't care about moral philosophy. Moral philosophy is just some things that were convenient and therefore effective a few generations back. They get defined as morals a few generations later. A second response, and one with which I also have a good deal of sympathy, is that there are a number of important values in the world. They cannot be arranged in any simple hierarchy, or at least are not going to be at any time soon. Individual liberty is an important value in and of itself, not merely as a means to happiness, so we should not be willing to sacrifice large amounts of it in exchange for small accounts of happiness. But liberty is not the only value, nor is it infinitely important compared to other values, well said. So we should not be willing to sacrifice unlimited amounts of happiness for small gains in liberty. So beautifully said. Such an honest scholar, such a balanced scholar. A third possibility is that the conflict between libertarian and consequentialist values is only apparent. Perhaps there is some deep connection between the two, so that libertarian ethics, properly understood, is the set of rules that leads to the maximum of human happiness. The counterexamples given in the previous chapter must then be interpreted as some combination of mistakes about what is possible. For some reason, those situations could not arise in the real world, and mistakes about what is implied by a correct statement of libertarian principle. Something along these lines seem to be suggested by the arguments of those libertarian philosophers who claim to get their principles not by generalizing from what seems right or wrong to them, but by deducing what set of rules is appropriate to the nature of man. One argument in favor of this approach is that it fits the observation that libertarianism and utilitarianism, while quite different in principle, frequently lead to the same conclusion. I absolutely agree, which is why I have no shame in admitting that I'm an utilitarianist, but utilitarianism is so looked down upon because people think only short-term gratification is utility. तो भाई long-term utility क्या utility नहीं है. Through most of this book, I have used consequentialist arguments to justify libertarian conclusions. By doing so, I provided evidence that the potential conflicts between the two approaches, which I discussed in the previous chapter, are the exception rather than the rule. In chapter 31, I tried to show that the institutions of anarcho-capitalism would tend to generate libertarian laws. A key step in that argument was my claim that the value to individuals of being able to run their own lives is typically greater than the value to anyone else of being able to control them. Or in other words, that increases in liberty to that increases in liberty tend to increase that increases in liberty tend to increase total utility, right? A fourth possibility, the last which I will consider, is that libertarianism is wrong and we should accept utilitarianism instead. According to the strict utilitarian position, rules, actions, ethics must be judged solely by their effect on the sum. Some utilitarians would say the average of human happiness. Whatever increases either sum of human happiness or average of human happiness. Whatever increases happiness is good, whatever decreases it bad. Libertarian principles are then valued only as a means, a set of rules that frequently lead to increases in total utility and should be rejected when they do not. This again is a possible interpretation of arguments that claim to derive libertarian principles from the nature of man, although not, in my experience, an interpretation that those who make such arguments are willing to accept. One argument against utilitarianism is that it cannot be a correct moral rule because there is no way we can tell whether we are following it. We cannot observe other people's utility and are therefore unable to judge what will increase it. Even if we could observe individual utilities, we do not know how to compare the utility of different people and so have no way of judging whether a gain in happiness to one person does or does not balance a loss to another. I find this argument unconvincing because the claim it is based on is too strong. Consider the act of buying a present. If you really have no knowledge at all about what makes other people happy, then buying a present is pure guesswork. You might just as well open a page of the Sears catalog at random, throw a dart at it, and buy whatever you hit. Nobody believes that. If we did, we would not buy presents. Consider a court awarding damages. If we really know nothing at all about other people's utility, how can a court decide how much someone owes me for breaking my arm? For all the judge knows, I enjoyed having my arm broken. What does the judge know? Assuming that I disliked it, he has no way of knowing whether my disutility for a broken arm is measured by a penny or $1 billion. We give presents, we award damages, and we do not believe that other people's utility is entirely unobservable. What we do believe, or at least what many of us believe, is that each of us knows more about his own values than most other people do, and that people are therefore usually better off deciding what they want for themselves. That is one of the main arguments in favor of a free society. It is a long step from that to the claim that we know nothing at all about other people's values. Even if we were entirely unable to observe other people's values, that would not necessarily prevent us from constructing a society designed to maximize total utility. Each person knows his own values, so all of us put together know everybody's values. In order to maximize the total utility of the society, we would construct rules and institutions that utilized all of that information via some sort of decentralized decision-making system, with each person making the decisions that require the particular knowledge he has. This is not, of course, merely an abstract possibility. One of the strongest arguments in favor of letting people interact freely in a market under property rights institutions is that it is the best known way to utilize the decentralized knowledge of the society, including the knowledge that each individual has about his own values. The field of welfare economics largely consists of the analysis of the rules that lead to optimal outcomes under specified circumstances, where the outcomes are evaluated in terms of the preferences of the individuals concerned. One originator of modern economics, including much of welfare economics, was Alfred Marshall, an economist and utilitarian who viewed economic theory in part as a way of figuring out how to maximize total utility. Even if individual preferences can be observed either directly or as reflected in actions, we are still left with the problem of comparing them. How can we say whether something which makes one person worse off and another better off produces a net increase in human happiness? The answer, I believe, is that we may not be able to make such comparisons very well or describe clearly how we make them, but we still do it. When you decide to give $10 worth of food and clothing to someone whose house has just burned down, instead of sending a $10 check as an unsolicited gift to a random millionaire, you are expressing an opinion about which of them values the money more. When you decide where to take your children for vacation, you are making a complicated judgment about whether their total happiness will be greater camping in a forest or wading on the seashore. We cannot reduce the decision to a matter of precise calculation, but Few of us doubt that the unhappiness A gets from the prick of a pin is less than the unhappiness B gets from being tortured to death. Yeah, Varun Dev, we are live. Utilitarianism is a possible moral rule. The difficulties of applying it to real world problems are substantial, but so are the difficulties of applying an alternative rule such as minimizing coercion. One would face very similar problems in defining and measuring the amount of coercion and in judging the trade off between increased coercion for one person and decreased coercion for another. Utilitarianism is a possible moral rule, but it is not the one that I am willing to accept. Why? For the same reason that I reject all simple statements of libertarianism, which is because I can construct hypothetical situations in which it seems clear to me that the rule gives the wrong answer. You are the sheriff of a small town plagued by a series of particularly brutal murders. Fortunately, the murderer has left town. Unfortunately, the townspeople do not believe that the murderer has left and will regard your assertion that he has as an attempt to justify your own incompetence in failing to catch him. Okay, तो लोग सोच रहे हैं कि शरीफ पकड़ नहीं पा रहा है मगर मर्डरर एक्चुअली भाग गया है. Feeling is running high. If no murderer is produced, 3 or 4 innocent suspects will get lynched. There is an alternative. You can manufacture evidence to frame someone. Once he has been convicted and hung, the problem will be gone. The society's scapegoat. Should you do it? On utilitarian grounds, it seems clear that the answer is yes. You are killing one innocent person but saving several, and you have no reason to believe that the one you kill values life any more than the ones you save. You yourself may receive disutility from knowing that you have framed an innocent man, but if it gets bad enough, you can always kill yourself, leaving a profit of at least one life's worth of utility. I am not willing to accept the conclusion. In an earlier hypothetical, I said that I would steal. In this one, I would not frame. To save 1,000,000 lives, perhaps, but for a net profit of 1 or 2, no. It follows that I am not a utilitarian. Although I reject utilitarianism as the ultimate standard for what should or should not happen, I believe that utilitarian arguments or consequentialist arguments more generally are usually the best way to defend libertarian views. While most people do not believe that maximizing human happiness is the only thing that matters, most do believe that human happiness is important. Libertarians are not the only ones who avoid conflicts by believing that the system they favor works both morally and practically. To the extent that I can show that a particular libertarian proposal, like abolition of heroin laws or minimum wage laws or all government, produces attractive results, I have an argument which will have some weight in convincing almost anyone to support it. So one reason to base any arguments on consequences rather than justice is that people have widely varying ideas about what is just, but generally agree that making people happy and prosperous is a good thing. If I argue against heroin laws on the grounds that they violate the addict's rights, I will convince only other libertarians. If I argue that drug laws, by making drugs enormously more expensive, are the chief cause of drug-related crime, and that the poor quality control typical of an illegal market is the main source of drug-related deaths, I may convince even people who do not believe that drug addicts have rights. A second reason to use practical rather than ethical arguments is that I know a great deal more about what works than about what is just. This is in part a matter of specialization. I have spent more time studying economics than moral philosophy, but I do not think that that is all it is. One reason I have spent more time studying economics is that I think more is known about the consequences of institutions than about what is or is not just. That economics is a much better developed science than moral philosophy. If so, the implications are not limited to the best choice of arguments with which to convince others. In the previous chapter, I gave a long list of questions which I saw no way of using libertarian principles to answer. In the next chapter, I will argue that they are all questions that can, at least in principle, be answered by using economic theory to discover what rules maximize human happiness. If so, then economics is not only a better way of persuading others, it is also a better way of figuring out what I myself am in favor of. Well said. Abhay saying this is a very masculine view. Do you mean David Friedman's view, or are you a little behind in the live stream and talking about Nietzsche's views? This is where we'll end the discussion of the book today for now. Because if we read too much at once, you retain nothing almost. So I'll just mark it here. Next chapter is called answers. First we discuss problems, and then we are going to discuss answers, and next day maybe we'll go through the problems chapter as a recap once again, or do a recap of the last few paragraphs and then start the chapter called answers. How big is this chapter? Yeah, it's pretty big, so we'll have to do it from the next day. Answers, the economic analysis of law. Economic analysis of law. This is going to be so much fun. Let me check some comments now. What a fascinating book. Ruggo is saying most abstracted quote-unquote rules I've seen run into this problem, even utilitarianism. When you contextualize them differently, you get undesired results. Maybe the rule should be don't decontextualize, or don't have too many rules. Very practical, yeah. Do you know TIK history? No, what's that? Oh, I am on utilitarian views. Yeah, but utilitarian for short-term utility or long-term utility? What's TIK? TIK history. Let me check the Google. TIK history. It's a YouTuber who creates detailed and accurate historical documentaries that aim to put TV documentaries to shame. अच्छा, तो ये आदमी क्या करता है? हिस्ट्री का रिवीजन वगैरह करता है क्या? मतलब हिटलर उतना खराब नहीं था, चर्चिल खराब था, वैसा चीजें बोलता है क्या? वरुण देव इज सेइंग हाउ कम सो लो व्यूअर्स 9 really? हाँ, ऐसा अजीब टाइम पे किया हूँ, कोई मतलब प्रेसिडेंस नहीं है, रैंडमली आज सुबह अचानक बैठ गया, फिर बुक डिस्कशन भी है, फिर इतना डेंस टॉपिक भी है, ऐसा नहीं है कि हम बैठ के सिर्फ मुस्लिम्स के को गाली दे रहे हैं, फिर वेस्टर्न स्टाइल कैपिटलिज्म का कॉन्सेप्ट है, तो फॉर दोज रीजंस ये 9 व्यूअर्स ही होंगे. Should not Nirajan read Marx today? I have Das Capital. We will read it someday, but on May Day, तो definitely libertarianism. Eva is saying especially short-term ones. No, on short-term ones, so we will always lose. Tick history is really good. I see. Gautam is saying because he's not showing his handsome face while reading the book. I think it helps people concentrate more on the topic and the book if I don't show my face, because otherwise you are looking at me, you're looking at my t-shirt, phone, etc., guitar. Your brain attention span is getting distributed among consuming all of these bullshit details. But when you have nothing to look at, it's more concentration goes on the content. He exposes how communism and fascism and Nazism are same with different. I see. Awesome. দাস ক্যাপিটাল কি যাদের পদবী দাস তাদেরই শুধু পড়া উচিত? Yes, it's a Kayasta Capital book. Okay then, thank you for joining, guys. Today at 7:30 we will have a Bengali podcast with economics finance expert, civil engineering expert, a massive bio. He has studied in JU, IIT Kharagpur, etc. Sudipto Guho, he's also a BJP spokesperson. He has been on our podcast many times. He'll come back today to discuss, but it's going to be in Bengali. We will discuss why why salaries are so low in Bengal, and what is the development vision of BJP. And obviously people will grill him a little about caste and stuff, so we will touch upon it a little. Yeah, Sudipto Guho is coming today. And after that at night, if I'm able to, yeah, I think I will be able to do. At night, we will probably discuss someone called a Sikh sociologist called Jotka. His surname is Jotka. Mr. Sociologist has been telling me to do this for a long time now. I have not been able to find the perfect opportunity, but we will have to now talk more and more about caste. इतने दिन मुझको बोलते थे कि इतना क्या कास्ट करते हो, डेवलपमेंट के बात करो, बिजनेस के बारे में बात करो, मोटिवेशन दो, एक्सेट्रा. क्या कास्ट में पड़े हो? अब देखो गांड में कैसे घुसा दिया कास्ट. अब हमारा ही डिस्कोर्स is the only thing that can save India. So Jotka is someone who says that casteism cannot exist without economics. If economics flips, then castes flip. But he does not go far ahead enough to say castes and class are equal, because then he will say that therefore caste is completely devoid of Hinduism. But if someone says, like many right-wingers say, that caste is just class, then at least Jyotka is going near that direction. He is going to that right-wing direction at least. So we are going to use his arguments. He's a very, very credentialed historian. He's at JNU, I think. Check him out on Google. Check out his bio. And you all know I'm not in favor of calling caste simply class, because there's the issue of status and metaphysical desires. But I also agree 100% that the key needle pusher is definitely economics. But after that, the entire discourse is about status and metaphysical desires, not just kitna paisa hai bank pe. So we will check out Jyotka today. Dada, will you take up caste census discussion? Yeah, we will take it up with Academic Man on probably Tuesday. It feels more human, I guess, yeah. But even the posture gets fucked, so I have to do it for that reason as well. I have to keep the book here. पहले बहुत मेरा शोल्डर दर्द होता था, मैं पूरा का पूरा टाइम कैमरा ऑन करके यहाँ बुक रख के पढ़ता था. Dada, we are Reels generation, we are addicted to screens, so if there is nothing on screen, people will leave. That's why show your face. तो भाई spondylitis हो जाएगा. By the way, Half-Blood Prince, did you find out something about that issue? कि चित्पावन Brahmins are Jews? हमारे घर में भी बाकी चीज देखने को योर टर्न. हैप्पी महाराष्ट्र डे. आई सी मे डे में ही महाराष्ट्र डे है. क्या 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 बात. ओके देन, थैंक्स फॉर जॉइनिंग गाइस. सी यू एट 7:30. बाय बाय.
যদি সবাই ফিরে যায় ওরে ওরে ও ভাগা সবাই ফিরে যায় যদি গহন পথে যাওয়ার কালে কেউ ফিরে না যায় তবে পথের কাটা তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা দলরে তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা দলরে যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে তবে একলা চলো রে যদি আলো না ধরে ওরে ওরে ও ভাগা আলো না ধরে যদি ঝড় বাদলে আধার রাতে দুয়ার দেয় ঘরে তবে বজ্রা নলে আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা চলো রে আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা চলো রে যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে তবে একলা চলো রে একলা চলো একলা চলো একলা চলো